Hi, I'm Quincy Larson. I'm the teacher who founded freeCodeCamp 5 years ago, and I am thrilled today to bring you this video. It's very different from what we've been publishing on freeCodeCamp's YouTube channel for the past 5 years. We've been publishing in-depth tutorials and full courses on Python, Java, JavaScript, Kotlin, a whole lot of different topics. And we've also been covering important libraries like PyTorch, Pygame, TensorFlow, things like that. So, hang on, I need to give my kid a little push. Hey, Quinton, you ready?
Yeah.
Whee! Higher? Whee! All right, I'm gonna get back here where it's less windy. So, we are going to be, in this episode, interviewing some of the most interesting people in open source. That would be, of course, Adam Stacoviak and Jerod Santo from the legendary Changelog podcast. If you haven't heard the Changelog, it is the preeminent podcast on open source software. And pretty much every major open source maintainer has been on there at some point. Dan Abramov, DHH, Yehuda Katz, and then, of course, a whole lot of maintainers you haven't heard of. They have hundreds of episodes, and this is their 10-year anniversary. So I drove down to Houston, Texas, hung out with them in the studio, and we recorded 5 hours of interviews. Okay, I interviewed them for like 2.5, 3 hours, and then they turned around and interviewed me for like an hour and a half. All of that is going to be on this video. I've added timestamps below so you can jump wherever you need to go in the video. And just a quick heads up, this is not a visually stunning video. This is 3 people sitting in a studio talking into microphones. I would encourage you to consider doing the dishes, maybe going to the gym, maybe driving to work, doing other things while you watch this video, because just sitting there staring at the 3 of us sit in our chairs for 5 hours would not be the best use of your time. So listen to this in the background while you do other things that don't use your brain fully, so you can still pay attention to the interview, and enjoy. I think you're going to learn a lot, and I learned a lot about both Adam and Jerod. They had never done an interview like this where they talked about their background. Adam was in the military. Jerod was like a recipient of several scholarships, and he has some interesting stories behind that, and that's how he was able to go to school. And then just how they got into software development, what kind of freelance projects they've been doing, the story behind the changelog, all this stuff is so fascinating. And so again, enjoy the video. And remember, like after this, we're going to go straight back to publishing full-length courses. This is just a one-time video, so but I think you'll really enjoy it and have fun. Happy coding, everybody. Hey, welcome to the freeCodeCamp podcast. We have a very special podcast today. We are interviewing the founder of the Changelog and his sidekick. So I'm going to introduce them properly in a moment, but I just want to welcome you. This is a special episode of the freeCodeCamp podcast because we're technically on hiatus for the rest of the year while we handle a whole lot of other burning fires. But I have been a huge fan of the Changelog ever since I started my developer journey back in the early 20-teens. And this show has been a huge window into the world of open source development for me, and I've learned so much from so many of the masters of open source development by listening to the Changelog. And today, I am thrilled to flip it and ask a whole lot of questions to the creators of the show and celebrate their 10-year anniversary. How many podcasts you know of that have gone on to 10 years?
Not very many, no.
All right. So first, Adam Stacoviak, the founder of the Changelog, and the host for the past 10 years, and Jerod Santo, who has stepped in and been a huge force in the Changelog over the past few years. And we're going to learn a whole lot about him. Let's go. First, Adam, I just want to learn a little bit about you. Like,
sure.
What was your early life like, Adam?
You want to go back to like the beginning, like early life?
I mean,
like 8, 5, what year?
If there were any really formative experiences in your childhood, go for it. But yeah.
I would say for me, probably the one thing that wouldn't seem obvious is I grew up poor. like from a town that people either go to jail, become alcoholics, just not a lot of hope. And I came from a place where I would say that to be where I'm at today, if people see me that I met and went to school with years and years ago, just don't believe it, My dad died when I was really young, so it was a big part of my life to have a father figure missing in my life. My mom was amazing. She raised me and my brother, single mom, and I love her. She's since passed away in 2008, but she was always my encourager, always my believer in me, and quite honestly, she's the reason why I'm at where I'm at, because I guess ages ago when blogging was cool, right? Back in like 2003, 2004.
Blogging's still cool, right?
Oh yeah, when it was the era of blogging.
The blogosphere.
Right. Yeah, that's right. The blogosphere. I had a blog, right? And I didn't live right next to my mom anymore. I had moved and I was about 5 hours away. So I had to have a blog to, keep up with family. It was where we posted our family pictures and just did whatever. And I shared my thoughts. And I got really into web design through WordPress and the theme Kubrick, if anybody remembers Kubrick.
I do remember Kubrick.
That was an entry point for me. That's how I learned CSS, by like looking at that CSS and be like, what is margin, what is padding, all that stuff. And so I got really curious about web design and, just all that stuff, and got really into it. And then I got really busy at work and just sort of like didn't have enough time because it was just a hobby for me at the time. And my mom's like, you're not doing this anymore. Why not? This and that. And I'm like, I just don't have time for it. It's no big deal, whatever. She's like, but you're really good at it. And like, she's like, you're really good at it. You shouldn't stop. You shouldn't quit. You're really good at this. You should find a way to do this more. And, it was literally that moment when she said that I sort of internalized that as like, okay. Mom says I should do it. I should do it. And literally, if she didn't say that, and I know how silly blogging might have been at that time, and it was not even a cool blog. It was just my family blog. It was like, nobody should ever read it. Not interesting thoughts at all. But she's like, you should keep doing this. And that's probably one of the most formative things for me, I would say, to get me to here. There's a couple other things, of course, too, but that specifically around web design, web development, and like pursuing it deeper was that moment.
Yeah, so you touched on the fact that you were working in another field and just pursuing software development as a passion. Let's back up a little bit to, high school. You're in this town where generally people don't go on to write features. How did you break out of that?
Sheer luck, God's will. I would just say, gosh, man, I look back on those times. So I was the person that didn't have any money for college. And my friends, many of my close friends had some sort of plan because their parents were fortunate enough to have money in the bank and make that plan. For me, I didn't have that plan. I didn't even have great grades in high school. I was terrible. And not because I wasn't smart, but because I just didn't have anybody really, aside from my mom and a couple others, like really helping me to apply things. And when I graduated high school, I barely graduated. It was terrible. Like, I missed so many days of school the last year of my high school year. Like, I just didn't want to be there anymore. I wanted to move on to whatever was next. And when I left high school, this is like going super deep, but when I left high school, I kind of told myself, I need to make a plan. And so the cool thing to say would be, I'm taking a year off, prior to going to college. Well, I just didn't have any money to go. I didn't have a plan. Like, how am I going to get there? And so I spent the next year after high school sort of like making some sort of plan. I worked at this place called Reese Brothers, where they did telemarketing. Hey, I was a telemarketer at one point in my life. I actually may have called you at one point to ask you about AT&T long distance. It was probably like 10 cents or whatever, and I can give you a great deal if you bought today. Hey, that's how that worked. But yeah, I was a telemarketer, got done with that, and then I became a pizza guy. I started to like toss pizzas and flip them and spin them. There was a local mom and pop pizza joint. What was it called? I forget. But it was amazing. They had this thing called a Red Top. It's amazing pizza. And then my roommate at the time, because I'd moved out of my home and went and got an apartment with a buddy of mine and all that good stuff. Well, he was in the National Guard, and I come from a family that has, all of the men in my family have all been in the military. My dad, my grandfathers, my brother, my uncles. So it wasn't like this legacy thing, but I was like, I got to do something. Maybe I'll make enough money to buy a car. I was really motivated by money in a car and like some sort of like money for college. And so the SGLI bill was an option then. And so I was like, well, all right, I'll go in the military. So I went into the military full time in 1998. And so I was in the Army for 3.5 years. They had this special program where you can go into, it was training plus 3 years or something like that. And so I went in for training, which was about 6 to 8 months, and then 3 years of service. So it's around 3.5, almost 4 years, not quite 4 years. So typically the term of service is 4 years. That's why I'm making a big deal about it, because anybody listening will be like, I thought 4 years was the minimum. Well, I kind of got off a little bit there by shaving a few months off, but went to Bosnia, did all sorts of cool stuff in the Army, went over in Europe. Just a lot of fun. So, I mean, the military, Jerod knows, I've told Jerod this story at least, but the military for me was, there was a moment when I was in this thing called AIT, Advanced Individual Training. Everything in the military is an acronym. So there's always like something, you got, UCMJ, that's the rule set, essentially the government, for lack of better terms, the laws. What am I getting at? So when I was in AIT, the drill sergeant, like even though I went in the military and I was trying to like do something, I didn't really apply myself to be the best soldier. I was still sort of like figuring it out. And I wasn't doing a great job. I was late, not prepared, not the best at physical fitness, so I was like the lower echelon of soldier. And so one day I'm standing in the third line of formation, and the drill sergeant says, Stakoviak, front center, you're first squad leader now. And so that means that you're now the leader of the first squad. And there's like usually like, 3 or 4 squads. So like 3 different lines. So if you think of a formation, it's the rows are squads. And so if you're facing the formation on the far left side, that's the first person. And that's the person that's in charge of that squad. So I got basically made under the person who is in charge of the unit. I was the second in command, for lack of better terms. And I didn't do anything to deserve it or earn it. He just gave it to me. And like from that day on, I was like, I'm a leader now. I have to be a leader. How do I be a leader? How do I lead? What's it look like? What does a leader look like? How do they talk? How do they walk? How do they act? And so it sort of reshaped my formation of what it meant to lead. I started to, press my uniform, shine my boots. They call it dress right dress in the military. Be very, all the angles are squared and whatnot. So I guess I was given an opportunity to lead, which is why I'm a huge advocate for, just helping somebody that doesn't even think they deserve it or know how to do it. Give them a chance, encourage them into a leadership position. And I was not the best. I probably failed a lot. And that doesn't matter, though, because where I'm at today as a man, as a dad, as a father, as a leader of any sort is because of some of those moments.
He must have seen a lot in you if he gave you that responsibility. So it's possible that...
I don't think he did, honestly. I don't think he did. I don't think I deserved it at all. He wasn't like, oh, he looks good, let's get him up here. I think he was just like rando. And I was just luck of the draw. And I think I was telling Jerod this story the other day. Like, he's like, would you thank him today or something like that?
Yeah, well, we were talking about people who influenced us in our lives. And the question is, should you go back to that person? Because you don't appreciate it then. I mean, sometimes you do, but especially as a young person, we just don't appreciate what we have, the opportunities given to us. And the question is, well, now that we look back, and I say, we're talking about a teacher of mine. Shout out to Mr. Kasner in Miller North High School. There he is. A guy who, I was like, wow, I didn't realize it, but he was a good teacher, and he impressed things upon me. And the question was, well, would you go back to that person if you could and just thank them? Because now you have that appreciation. And that was what I was asking you.
And I would. And I was like, well, you know what I did today? I was Googling Drill Sergeant Hillard, the person's name that did this. And I was like, what's really interesting, as somebody in that position, he probably has no idea he changed my life. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
these things happen out there that we don't get that feedback loop. Like as software developers and people who, deal with teams and flows and frameworks and systems, we crave that feedback loop. And it's a built-in mechanism into the human brain to desire and need that feedback loop, right? To have relationship is a key humanistic feedback loop. Find a human in solitary confinement, whether they're in the caves or in prison or something like that. You find somebody super alone, you're going to find somebody seriously dealing with some mental issues because of that solitary, because of that soloness. And I don't think he has any idea that he influenced my life so well, which is crazy to me.
Yeah, the feedback loop is very loose in the real world.
That's right.
Especially among, who knows, were you able to find him on Google? Are there so many stars that name? Or?
As a matter of fact, I kind of got scared for a second because I did find an article from the base I was at that was tragic, and I started reading through it, and thank God his name wasn't in it. It was something else, sad about the situation. But I was like, gosh, here I am looking for this person, and something bad happened to them or whatever. Yeah. You find somebody's obituary, and it's kind of terrible too, because like if you're out there and you're listening to this and you're thinking, man, there's somebody who influenced my life, try to thank them if you can, because the last thing I would want is to find that person's obituary and to be too late. You know, if I could find them somehow, some way, I would be like, thank you so much for sharing leadership with a crap soldier like me, because wow, it changed my life.
It's a great reminder. I'm going to have to put that on my to-do list, because I've got a lot of people myself who have steered me in the direction. A lot of teachers, a lot of employers and managers.
Yeah.
So you get back from the Army. Mm-hmm. You did your 3 years and your education before that. Did you end up going to school, or what did you do from there?
That's funny. So that's actually the next part that got me to where I'm at, closer to today, I would say, at least. So here, specifically geographically in Texas. So for a little while there, I lived in Canada, and that's a really long story, and I don't feel like going into that. But I went from the military to Florida because a good friend of mine that I grew up and went to high school, this is one of the people who had a plan, had parents with money, and they sent them to college, to school. And so instead of going to school, I went into the military. This person, my good buddy, Donald Kilgore, Donald.
Yeah.
We work with DK quite a bit. He went to film school in Orlando, Florida, at a place called Full Sail, really well known for audio, visual, directing, film, all that good stuff. And so I left the military with like this SGLI bill, thinking I'm going to go to Florida and I'm going to go to film school, or I'm going to go to audio school. So I'd wanted to do either directing of films or get into like audio stuff around films. I loved it. I didn't know how to do it, but I liked the idea of it, which is so ironic of what I do now. At least one component of my job. And I never went to school. I never ended up making it there, which is kind of an interesting story. If you want to go there, I can take you to like the next. I would say if we had to like facet my skill set, one of my biggest skill sets is sales and just relationships and partnerships. I love that kind of stuff. And I'd mentioned Reese Brothers and doing telemarketing. Well, I'd always liked to help people. And so I think when you say, well, sales is really just trying to help people solve their problems. It's not about getting Jerod to buy something he don't want to buy with money he don't have. It's about he has a problem. I can help solve that problem. That's sales to me. And that's what we do. We solve people's problems in a lot of ways. And so I kind of a long story, but I'll make it really short. I had a friend who was trying to be a DJ, and we were at a club early in the day, kind of like 7 o'clock. Times people aren't at the club.
Right.
It's not the time you want to be a DJ. And so we were there. I see him talking to this guy at the bar. I see him go back and do his thing. And I go over and introduce myself, because I'm like, if you're a friend of my friends, you're a friend of mine kind of person. And so I went over and I introduced myself. I said, hey, I saw you talking to my buddy Dion. My name's Adam, et cetera, whatever. And long story short, this person's name was Sean Hughes, another person that I would love to see again and thank, because that day I was at a crossroads of like what I was doing, which was basically nothing. I had no real ambition at the time. I was like, well, I'm really hating what I'm doing now. I'm thinking about getting into car sales. So car sales, right? I love selling. Hey, people need cars. I can help you solve your problem by getting a great car, whatever. But car sales is generally not the most fun sales job. It's got a lot of ickiness to it, so to speak. You know, it doesn't have a great reputation for being a great job. You can make a lot of money, but it may not be the best job for you. And so long story short, I meet Sean. He's like, don't get into car sales. I've been into car sales. It's terrible. Don't do that. I tell you what, come in on Monday. This is Friday. Come in on Monday to my office. You sound like a great young man. Got a great head on your shoulders. I got something I'm working on at a company called Muzak. I'd love to interview you for this thing we have going on. So that's another like huge moment in my life where I went from like no direction to direction. I go in on Monday, meet with Sean. It's a great office. It's a legit job where you got to dress nice, right? And you get a computer, like, you know what I mean? Like I'm not talking to a POS, which is a point of sale system, or, you know, which is nothing wrong with that. It was just the next direction for me. Because at the time I was a server. I was serving, you know, waiting tables, doing that kind of stuff in Orlando. Making good money because lots of hospitality around that area. But this guy, man, hired me into this position. It was an LAPD program called Leads, Appointments, Deals, Proposals. So more acronyms, not in the military this time, but Leads, Appointments, Deals, Proposals. And that's what it was all about. I was basically inside sales for account executives. And I learned the ropes of this business. If you haven't heard of Muzak, if you've been into, say, Old Navy or Banana Republic or any sort of like upscale retail environment, they put the sound systems in, they put the music in, and that's what I learned how to do, like this sort of like a soundtrack to evoke an emotion, right? I started getting into user experience, this whole aspect of design and stuff like that. Music had a really good brand design.
I always thought it was elevators. Are they
That's where it began.
Okay.
So it began in like the early 1920s.
Gotcha.
As a combination of music and Kodak, because the person who had founded Muzak, it was a whole different era, but he loved music and he loved Kodak.
So he just put them together and had a
Muzak. There you go.
Not the silliest company name origin. Sorry.
Yeah, you could do worse.
You could do worse. And so, you know, I got into sales there. I had started making good money, and that's. I never made it to school though. So the interesting to answer sort of a long-winded version of like, did you go to school? The answer is no, but I found a really awesome job that helped me learn all sorts of skill sets that I literally use today to help build our business.
Yeah, and I guess to some extent, like they used to say, going to the military was like an alternative to going to school because you learn a lot of the same things, right? You learn how to operate and structure and everything. And by that time, you'd already traveled around the world and done a lot of things to expand your horizons anyway. Yeah.
I was used to traveling. I was used to being a vagabond, for lack of better terms. You know, I'd just pack a bag and go somewhere or take a few things only. I've slept in some really weird places, and I've also showered and not showered in some really weird places. So I've actually, the longest stretch I've gone for not showering is about 3.5 weeks.
What?
Wow.
Yeah, we were on a field problem. And you were lucky. It was just like a certain kind of field problem where we had to, it was simulating a real world in battle environment kind of thing. And we were learning because we're going to Bosnia, so we had to train. So when you go in the military, you just don't know how to be a soldier and how to do these things and go overseas and do different stuff. You have to train to do these things. So we went to training to learn how to, you know, go overseas and kind of simulate that. Now I showered over there, which is awesome. But during this, they call them field problems. During this field problem, I didn't shower. I mean, a wash rag to myself, maybe a little bit, but like a legit in the shower. I might be pushing a little bit, at least 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks.
Yeah, man. I don't know if I could do it. Like
it was tough.
I'd be knocking myself over every time I lifted my arm.
Everybody smelled.
Yeah, because I was going to ask if it wraps around. Like it's bad for a while, but eventually you just kind of get used to it and it goes back to normal.
Yeah, it's kind of like after a while, it just sort of like normalizes. I will say though, when the field problem was over and we all got back to the barracks, the first few in that immediately went and showered came out from their shower, and then everybody else is still coming in. You're like, oh my gosh, you guys smell so bad. Like it was pretty bad. At that point, you can smell the difference.
And the line for that shower must have been like tightly packed. Everybody's like anticipating the hot water.
Yeah. That's. I may forget that. I don't really know, but I'm sure.
You
Yeah,
blocked it out. Maybe.
There's always a line. It's like a line to brush your teeth, even.
Yeah. So, how did you transition from doing sales for Muzak, and you said doing some kind of in the direction of user experience design, like choosing music and trying to evoke specific emotions and communicate certain things. How did you explain the process of transitioning from that to getting more and more passionate about tech and ultimately doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, it's interesting that one of the things that made me realize I was more geeky than I'd ever thought I was, because I was never like, I guess just when I grew up, computers weren't around everywhere to sort of like easily stumble into or more easily get into, and so you almost had to really try. And so at the first time I had a phone was at this job. They gave me a cell phone. It was Nextel. That's how long ago it was. It was a Nextel phone, a flip phone, a Nextel phone. It was crazy. And the very first time I had my own laptop was at this job. The first time I like really used a computer for anything that was not like online chats or just whatever dinking around was at this job. So I'd kind of gotten into, there's I don't know if it's still around, but it was called ACT, an ACT database. It was like maybe you know this, you've seen it, Jerod, but it was a databasing system for like a basic CRM. Mm-hmm. And that, I started to tinker with that. I was never really good at it, but I started taking some classes around it and just realized that I had this sort of inkling into like a geek, or what I considered a geek at that time, geeky things, And Muzak had a really interesting brand, a really clean design, a real focus on how they say things. And it's funny, one thing we actually have that's a behind the scenes repo on GitHub. It's a repo we call One Voice, so that Jerod and I can sort of like say the same things and sort of define the same things around our business to say, well, when we talk to somebody around a partnership or a sales opportunity or, our guest guide, various things are in this so that Jerod and I can have, and begin to develop one voice for whomever sort of leads, commands, and interacts with, these levels of our business. And so that's something that they had. They actually had this entire book called One Voice. And I was like, that's really interesting how much you think about the emotion that you want to invoke as a part of your brand. Who you say you are really mattered to Muzak. And it could have just been they had some really good branding people, right, and people believed in it. But hey, I drank the Kool-Aid, man. I was all in it. So that's kind of what got me into it. But I'd mentioned it at some point. I moved to Canada. I moved to Canada as part of my job, and they had an affiliate there, and I was working in Canada. And long story short, this is when George Bush was president. The Americans did not have a great reputation abroad, whether it was Canada, Europe, wherever else, at least from my perspective, because people would not buy from me because I was an American, right? So I was an amazing salesperson, killing it. I think at age 21, when I was working at Muzak in the United States, I was making like 80, 90K a year in sales.
Wow.
I was just doing it for full-time sales for less than a year, almost barely 2 years, if that. So I was really killing it. I was top 5 in the country for Muzak.
For you.
Yeah. And then going there, and it's nothing against Canadians, but I felt really, I don't know how to describe it. I just felt really sad that these people would not buy from me because of where I'm from and because I have an American accent and I'm not Canadian and don't say, hey, I love Canadians. They're amazing. And I was like, okay, I just can't make ends meet. So long story short, I went there to work for this company there, and I just couldn't cut it. And so I knew somebody who ran this IT business, which is really where my story of technology and true web and software and stuff became a thing, and networking, because this business was called IT Weapons. They were IT weapons. You get it, right? Okay. It was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. They did Citrix, they did VMware, they did WatchGuard, so they did hardware and software. They would do large scale Citrix implementations, and this is when it was all about thin client, fat. What's the other
server?
Yeah, the you did all of it on servers. So Citrix was you had a thin client that was, kind of stupid, and all it was just a terminal to your server. And so everything was server based. And it's just an interesting era. This is around 2003, 2004, 2005 timeframe. So that's kind of the era then. I learned about servers, what they were, all that good stuff. And it's just pretty crazy to think like this job at IT Weapons started to open up doors into software, hardware, technology. And at one point, I didn't even know what a server was. I was like, I hear it. I hear people say server, but like, what's a server? So
ultimately, of course, you went on to found one of the most important podcasts about software, in my opinion. And yet you were working in sales.
Yeah.
Like, there must have been a pretty big transition there.
Yeah.
Just give us some broad strokes about how you went about getting more technical.
This was kind of interesting too, because I kind of stumbled into it, right? Like when I was working at IT Weapons, I was learning more. I was starting to take over the website for IT Weapons, and I was starting to deploy it and stuff like that, which was like basically just dragging and dropping an FTP. It was really, it was those days kind of thing. It was a self-built PHP, kind of just a rendering kind of situation. So it was really interesting that's like how much things have changed. I started getting more and more responsibility there around that kind of stuff, and sort of like defining where the brand went, how we spoke. We would have in-office kind of like conferences, for lack of better terms, where I would organize them. I would like get the people there to speak from Citrix, from WatchGuard, from VMware or whatever. And I would coordinate people, and I would coordinate the clients, and just kind of like started layering on all these different things of like biz dev, design, sales, all that kind of stuff. And then a buddy of mine, which ultimately I came here to Texas, I was in Canada, a buddy of mine started reaching out to me about like, I don't know why he asked me these things, but like he's like, hey, I got this issue with this web page I'm making. Can you help me? And I just started to solve his problems. And he's like, hey, can you just build these things for me? I've got some clients. And like, so next thing you know, I started to just like moonlight and freelance in web design and development. So I would design it, I would develop it, I would ship it, I would support it, and I would help, to some degree even land the deals. So it was sort of like full spectrum of like identify people to work with, understand what their problem set was, design something to fit it, and then build it and make it and ship it and support it. And after a while, he was like, do you just want to be, because he's a good buddy of mine. I grew up with him. I was kind of telling you that some of my friends had plans. He was the one that had a plan, went to school, and he was the one that went to Full Sail. His name's Donald Kilgore. Love Donald. He's like, you just want to like become a partner in my business and help me do this. And so we did. Started landing some really big clients. I think probably the biggest deal we landed was like $20,000 or $30,000. And that was like, for a website, that was a big deal. It was an RV dealership here in Texas called DeMontron. They're really well known around here. They have Chrysler, Jeep, Ford, whatever, and they have an RV place. And so we built out, and this is actually leading into Rails too, because this is like 2005. David had recently just said, whoops, and we were all watching. You know what I'm saying, right?
Right. David had him on our hands.
That's right. David had him on our hands.
Video of
DHH.
the Rails blog in 5 minutes.
Yeah. And so we had built this version of DeMontron, and we didn't really like how it was functionality. And so that's when Rails was really cool. I started getting into that more. I reached out to some people and kind of put together a team. I was on the front end, and they were building out the back end. And we built out this really awesome site in Rails. And I think I just kind of stumbled into it because I wasn't trying to be, even though my mom said I'm really good at it, I wasn't really thinking I would be a web developer. I kind of like just was doing it, was into like biz dev. I really like to create and develop relationships. And I just see that as like one more way to do it because one, I could do it well. No one else was really doing it. I had an opportunity. I can cultivate clients. I can do a lot of these interesting things. And the door just opened up.
Yeah. And I imagine a lot of the job was communicating with the clients and understanding their needs. And, you've got
I would talk to clients for hours even. Like on the phone for hours talking through things and figuring things out and a lot of iteration, a lot of feedback from them. So it was really fun.
So would you say Rails was one of the key inspirations for you starting a podcast around open source? I mean, Rails is one of the most important open source projects. It's brought so many people into the field. It revolutionized how a lot of CRUD-based web apps were built.
For sure.
So a little piece of the history is, so the person that I hired to work with me on the Rails site, his name's Josh Owens. He's pretty prominent in the JavaScript and I believe like Meteor space now. I think he still lives in Ohio. I can't recall, maybe Columbus area. He had a podcast that began in 2004 called the Web 2.0 Show. So I don't know if you know this, Quincy, but at one point the web was just 1.0, right? And then it became 2.0, and that just meant that we had gradients and like rounded corners. And
what version are we on at this point?
Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Still using HTML5 and CSS3, right?
There you go.
That's right. And so he had a podcast called the Web 2.0 Show. And it was one of the very earliest, first technical or tech or software-focused podcasts. And at that time, you didn't have to do much because you just had to be a podcast. You could be terrible quality, sound-wise, great content. It didn't matter. You had all the listeners because there was no one else doing it. And so his partner had quit, and this is how I got into podcasting, and more specifically, how I got into like talking to people that weren't just like my buddies nearby about software or technical related things. And so I became his co-host, I think in like late 2005, early 2006. I literally been podcasting since like 2005. I can say 2005 because at least like November 2005. Not all the whole year, but I can claim 2005.
Yeah, wow. So
Yeah.
you were on the ground floor of podcasting as a medium.
Yeah. I mean, in a lot of ways. I mean, I can remember using a really crappy Snowball. It was like a white microphone. It was crappy to me because you can see the mics we're using now. And over time, I had to learn about audio too, things that I never even really cared to learn about, that you sort of had to be forced to learn these things just by way of producing audio. And now you have to deliver a show that sounds really good. We used to get away with it before where we can like, not that we wanted to, but we could ship something to our listeners that wasn't immaculate sound quality, you know? But now we kind of feel like because of what listeners desire and demand, and because so many people are doing it well, and it's also a lot easier to produce it well. Mm-hmm. You know, now I couldn't think of like shipping. Like if you go back and listen to the Web 2.0 show, you will hear what I'm talking about. But yeah.
Yeah, even some of the earlier episodes of the Changelog, listening to them, I mean, it's just night and day with today and the production quality.
It's funny. You go back and listen to episode number 1, and then even go from 1 to just 100. Just go on the hundreds. Go to 1, 100, 200, and 300. What were like 367 will ship this week, I believe. So yeah,
it's consistency.
But the way the Changelog came about was I was working with a buddy named Win Netherland, and
Win Netherland,
kind of like the Netherlands, but okay. Netherland, and I think he used to say that too. He goes by Penguin, PENGWYNN on Twitter, so look him up. But he was at an interesting space because he ran a consultancy called Squeegee. Now, Win's got some really interesting, witty humor. So it was called Squeegee because he liked to like clean things and make things nice. And their brand was like a lot like you might imagine like a cleaning products brand. So like kind of like sheeny and shiny, and it was really interesting. I loved that aspect about him. But he was in his crossroads because he had just decided to leave his consultancy and sort of like go a new direction. And so did I. And so we were sort of both in this sort of like, let's establish our name for ourselves. Let's kind of like, you know, etch out some new territory. And obviously I had a background in at least doing something with podcasting. And so like talking about things. And I was like, what if we were both talking about how fast open source is moving? And I'm like, you know what people just need is they just need like a wayfinder through the version. So if something changes, if, you know, Rails 1.0 versus 1.8 or whatever it might be, you know, somebody just needs to sort of like chronicle the changelog of a software product or software, open source, whatever. Like someone needs to sort of like tell that story. That's what's missing. What happened here and what happened here and what's happening in between. People don't have that. And so I was like, what if we just did a show called Changelog? So it was just Changelog at first. And Will was like, what about the Changelog?
So it's like the opposite of the Facebook to Facebook.
That's right.
Like Changelog to the Changelog.
Yeah.
Sounds more definitive.
Yeah. And so we were the Changelog. And as a matter of fact, it's really funny because it began as, we still own these domains.
Yeah. When did you get changelog.com? Because that's a really good domain.
Yeah. It took a couple of years. And it wasn't very expensive. There's a story behind that.
We had the changelog.com.
Yeah, it began as changelogshow.com, and that was actually what our original Google account was set up under. Our email was actually adam@changelogshow, and then we aliased thechangelog.com. And then eventually I'm like, you know what, we just need to shorten it to just changelog on Twitter and wherever we can. And so we only really did that because they became available to us. Somebody on Twitter gave that handle to us. Thank you. I can't recall your name, but we wrote about this at some point.
Never heard about somebody on Twitter actually responding. Did they just voluntarily, or did
they
you
just
ask
gave
them?
it to us? Yeah, they were in software, and so they liked what we were doing. They're like, I see that you're going to use it for good things. It's not like you just want it because you're some jerk or whatever. And so they knew we had good intentions. Changelog.com was owned by somebody else in software, and they I don't think they were really interested in selling it until I made him an offer, and then he agreed to it. We got changelog.com for $1,000.
Wow.
$1,000. Yeah.
What year was that?
I want to say like 2015, maybe.
Not that long ago.
Yeah, maybe 2014.
Man, what?
Probably 2014.
These are some really chill people, because I mean,
That's a great deal.
Yeah.
he could have seen like, well,
Yeah.
the writing's on the wall. You've been doing this for a while. You're probably going to keep doing this. I want more than $1,000. But
Yeah.
it sounds like he believed in the mission if he was willing to give you that kind of price.
Yeah. I don't think he believed in the mission. I think he just saw us as someone who could do something with it that wasn't just, I guess, I don't know, just something useful. And we were willing to give him what he desired, which was $1,000. And we ended up using Sedo, SEDO, to do the sort of like the whole, was the escrow kind of situation where we put the money in there. He's able to collect the money or whatever, and then it's a nice, easy way. So I recommend if you're going to buy a domain from somebody, I don't have all the details, but that's how we did it. I would do it that way if you don't know the person. Do it with some sort of like exchange scenario, somebody in the middle that can facilitate it. And I don't know if they would actually like press charges if they didn't follow through, but there's some sort of commitment.
Well, with an escrow in the middle, they can hold the funds.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's
Especially if it's like an international transaction.
Yeah.
Which court do you go to dispute things,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
that's smart.
But changelog.com was pretty cool. We even had, it was a big move. You helped, you did all that. Mm-hmm. Tell us some of the technical parts of that. I mean, what was the?
that was 5 years ago.
It's just like a lot of
redirects.
A lot of redirects.
Before we dig into all that, so of course I had to listen to the first episode of
Oh,
the
boy.
changelog for doing the research.
How did it
and,
sound? Did you like it?
I mean, it was pretty rough. I
Yeah.
pulled it up on like I've got a podcast tool that just makes it really easy to pull up old podcasts. I don't know how they archive it, because even when I go on like iTunes and try to scroll all the way down, it doesn't go all
That's
the way
terrible,
back,
yeah.
which kind of is disappointing.
Jerod can
aspect
share
of-
some reasons why at length
that's
and
an
in detail.
unfortunate scenario, but
Yeah.
Yeah, but I was able to find it and pull it up, and we'll link to it in the show notes if you want to give it a listen, just to hear the.
It's really easy.
contrast.
Changelog.com/1.
yep.
Oh,
There
really?
you go.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
it's really easy.
That's a good path. So David, or Win, I'm sorry.
Win.
Win Netherland, yeah.
Win sounds like a really cool guy. He ultimately went to get a job at GitHub. I
Right,
understand.
yeah. There's some story there, too. We can go into a little bit of
Yeah.
it. So, Win and I became close friends. We had actually done some teaching together. So Win was more developer, less designer, and less front end, but he really had an eye for aesthetic and an eye for design, and he loved to always tinker. And he was, and if I had to describe him, he was always like a minimalist approach to things, but not, he wasn't the kind of developer who's like, I can't touch CSS, or he just loved to like dive into things, and he just thrived at that. And so we did a class at Lone Star Ruby Conference and a couple other places I want to say, called Design Eye for the Dev Guy or Gal, and
It's quite a name.
which was it was pretty funny. And so what we wanted to do is like just help software developers who are just primarily in code and back end type stuff and not at all on the front end feel a bit more comfortable with early technologies like SAS, precompilers, stuff like that. And this is early days of SAS. This is even before like the SCSS syntax. So like this was super early days. So one side small tangent would be that before there was the changelog, I actually wanted to do a SAS podcast, but nobody would do it with me. So I died on that sword and instead decided to do this show, The Changelog, because I had a partner who would be willing to work with me on it. So there you go. No one was really interested in the SaaS. They're like, why don't you just do a CSS show? And there's CSS tricks. And I'm like, yeah, but Chris is nobody. I'm just kidding. Right? Chris is not nobody.
He's the man.
Yeah.
If you're listening, Chris, we love you.
That's right.
But that was like 2009, though. So like where CSS tricks is today to where it was then.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Chris has done an amazing job. So we were all early days, and that was like before it's where it's at now. And so there was just, the field was more green. There was a lot more opportunity, in terms of like
carving in a niche.
Right. Whereas now, like, we wouldn't start a front end focused website or podcast like that, like Chris would do, because somebody's already doing it well. We would do something else where there's a hole to fill, not to cramp in on somebody else's style.
Yeah, and open source was clearly something that needed some.
Yeah, and it was moving so fast. GitHub, I mean, the show began in 2009, and GitHub had just become a thing in 2008. And a little bit more history going one layer deeper. So on the Web 2.0 show, we actually met up with Chris Wanstroth and TP Dubs, Tom Preston Warner, 3 months after GitHub was founded.
Wow.
And we had them on the Web 2.0 show. So if you want to go back and listen to some really interesting old days of GitHub, not owned by Microsoft, not bought for billions, like dreamers. Like these were developers who were like, wow, we somehow found a way to tie in like this front end and this collaboration and Git. And like it was before all these visions and dream had come to fruition like they have.
Before they invented the pull
right.
request.
And so that's, to me, that's super cool. That's what really got me into like loving this medium, was because even with our show, we can go back and like chronicle the paths of some developers. We've had some people on 4 times, 3 times, several times, and we've seen not only their changes as individual people, but the software they command or the things they maintain or the communities they lead. It's just really interesting. I love the fact that we get a chance to be kind of what that drill sergeant was to me, the encourager, right? We like to shine our light in places where it's not always being shined, and just encourage people to press forward, to congratulate them for working really hard. Maintainers who don't get any thanks, we love to pat them on the back and say, keep going, you're doing an awesome job, and just do what we can to put more focus on the things they're working on.
Fun fact, so GitHub had their own podcast in the very, very early days of GitHub called Gitsplosion, which was Chris Wanstroth and Tom Preston Warner and PJ Hyatt, the 3 founders of GitHub, basically just sitting in a room and talking to each other. It was very low rent and it was very raw. Yeah. And I think it's disappeared off the internet once they probably raised funding and started becoming more corporate.
Probably a liability.
But I used to listen to that, and it was very raw, and I loved it. So I just thought of that when you talked about their early days Web 2.0 show. They actually had their own show about Git and GitHub, and they really just hung out. Anyways.
Yeah.
If you can find that, send us links. I'd love to listen to it again. It's some interesting content, but it's probably gone.
I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt.
One more layer to his story, though, in speaking to GitHub and podcasts, we were actually syndicated for a while onto github.com/explore. So for a while there, like this is early days too. So they love what we were doing. They love the changelog. They love what we're trying to do about open source and sharing, all the things happening. And they're like, let us help you somehow. And so they syndicated the most recent 5 episodes were on github.com/explore. Now it's not there anymore. So if you go there, don't be disappointed. I am, but if anybody at GitHub wants to, reignite, I'm just kidding. Whatever.
Yeah. No, that's some prime real estate right there.
Yeah, it was. Such an interesting time then too, because that GitHub was not at all the GitHub it is today, which doesn't mean it's bad or good. It just means that it was interesting because we could work with it was ran by developers, and not like, business people are bad, but it was like people who want to help other developers do well and do cool things. They were willing to share, what they were doing and prop up the show. For a while there, people actually thought the changelog was owned by GitHub. That's how closely things were. And so it's just an interesting time. I appreciate the time we were on Explore, but it was just really interesting that they were able to share that, and it was developers who ran it, not some bureaucrats or VC that didn't have this humanity connection to us as software developers. Just trying to, at that time, this show was just a hobby. It was after that it became a business, for lack of better terms.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and that's what I'm really excited to talk about next. So, of course, there was kind of like Urban Dictionary has this definition of this word called podfade.
Yes.
Where essentially a podcast will start publishing less and less frequently, and maybe they won't admit to themselves that the best days of the podcast are behind them, but maybe they are kind of heading toward the door, so to speak. So
oftentimes with a pod fade, there'll be a long gap and there'll be one last episode in which the podcast announces that it's returning.
Yes.
That is when you know
That's
you
the
have
worst.
a pod fade. That's the last episode in the feed is the apology. Sorry, we've been so quiet. We're back. And that's the end. But
that happens a lot on YouTube too.
yes.
We had that, but we continued.
Yeah. So let's talk about that
Okay.
struggle for the soul of the changelog.
Okay, so slight backstory on that too. So Win and I both met this guy named Josh Kofer, who was starting a nonprofit. He actually met Win first, and Win and I were both freelancing, as I mentioned, and doing the Changelog podcast as a hobby, fun thing just to do. And when Win was building his team for Pure Charity, this nonprofit that Josh Kofer was forming, to be a place for nonprofits to coalesce, to get information on how to best fundraise, how to lead their charges, how to unify their followers, their supporters, for lack of better terms. Win was like first, one of the first picks. I was a second hire after him, so I guess I was first pick. He's like, Adam, do you want to do this kind of thing? And so next thing you know, we're working for this, this nonprofit called Pure Charity. And Win was CTO. I think I was like, UX designer or something like that. I don't remember what my title was. Doesn't matter. The point was that we were just sort of like fleshing out our careers a bit more. And about 2 years pass, and the majors call, right? Win's in the farm club at Pure Charity. The majors, GitHub calls and says, hey, Win, you want to come out to San Francisco? We want to talk to you about some things. And so long story short, he got called up to the majors. He couldn't say no. It was we both loved what we were doing at Pure Charity, but he couldn't say no to it.
Yeah.
And it was like any podcast that's just a hobby, you only have so much love for it and so much time for it. When you have family, you've got your career, you got other things. And so Win was like, hey, I'm out of time. I just can't do this anymore. And I think that was around September 2012. And I was kind of bummed. I'm like, hey, I get it. I don't have a lot of time for it either. And then I sat in this sort of lull for a while, just thinking like, it's not worth much, but would anybody want to buy it? Like, should I keep it going? What should I do with it? I know what it means to so many people and what it could mean if we just keep it going. And so I was just really in this whole space where I was just questioning whether it made any more sense for me. Because I'm definitely, more on the design front end side than developer side. And Jerod has to remind me all the time to drop my imposter syndrome and say, dude, you're a developer. Because at least even right now, I feel less developer than I had been before. But I was always more on the front end, user experience, sort of like biz dev side of things, relationship side of things. How should it look? How should it function? How can we deliver it? Then the follow through, then the doing part of software. And I've worked with great people, but it's just not where I shine. I can do it, but I shine better in other areas. And so I was like, am I an imposter by just keeping this thing going? What can I do?
Yeah. Man, that is some hardcore imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And I totally,
Yeah.
there have definitely been depths with FreeCodeCamp as well, where I felt like a total imposter.
Yeah.
But thank goodness you didn't sell it. Because there's no way that anybody could have taken it over and brought it to such heights as it is today. But
Thank you.
so that's something I'm extremely grateful for, that you stuck with it. So you stuck with it, and a phone call, or tell us the story behind Jerod entering the stage.
I'll tee it up.
Tee it up
over.
for him and get
Okay.
yeah.
And my tee up is super short. He emailed Win.
Yeah.
And Win forwarded the email to me. That was it.
Yeah, so I was a listener, and I was tracking the blog. So Win has an uncanny skill of finding new things.
The gems.
Yeah, he could find gems. And, over the years, I've tried to imitate that, and I've gotten pretty okay at it. But I like to find things, too. A new open source project here, a new technique, a great blog post. And so I was following the blog mostly. I'm also a podcast junkie, was back then still, and that's why I know about Getsplosion, where most people don't even realize that was a podcast. I'm like, the GitHub guys have a podcast, I'll listen to it. And so I was a listener of the show, and I really appreciated the blog because I was in Omaha, Nebraska, doing my thing, writing software for people, and I very much felt like I was on an island, so to speak, in the open source world. I cut my teeth on Unix and Linux networks, and I was a Vim guy early on. I was just always in open source. Like I learned Perl, and then I learned Ruby, and then Rails blew my mind, and I was building Rails websites. And so I was in the open source universe. I didn't even really realize that like there was much else, even though like there's this entire Microsoft side of things that I just didn't. People started talking to me about C# and I didn't know what they're talking about early on. And then it started to fade. And the blogs were coming less and less often, and the podcast was happening less and less. And I was running my own single-person consultancy, basically making web apps for people. And I had known Win because of Ruby, I believe. I think he had a Ruby gem that I used.
Yeah.
And I can't remember which one it was. He actually was involved in the Twitter gem for a while.
Yeah, he was.
And I remember I had, contributed to that, and then basically we followed each other on Twitter, and I started listening to his podcast, and he started reading my blog or something. Anyway, we were just mutual connections there. And I didn't even know about Adam very much, except for he was the guy that was always talking to Win. Win did a lot of the interviews on the show back then. I knew that Adam was involved in the changelog, and Win, the changelog was Win and Adam, but I didn't know who Adam was. I knew who Win was. And so when it started to fade out, basically I had the capability of just helping out with the blog because I had my own business. And so I could fill in gaps and I could do that kind of work. And so I just emailed Win, and I was like, hey, I see you guys are like struggling to keep it going. Can I help? Because I can blog once a week or whatever it is. And so Win had actually moved on already. It was all behind the scenes. He was already working at GitHub or something. And so he just he's like, hey man, thanks for reaching out. And he forwarded me to Adam and Andrew, who was also a co-host at the time.
Yeah. Because Andrew and I worked together at Pure Charity as well. Andrew Thorpe.
And so that's how I got involved was through that.
Yeah.
I didn't want to see it die.
A listener. This could be you.
This is amazing. So this reminds me of like the story of like, Judas Priest, how like the Rob Halford had to leave the band for whatever reason, and they found a guy who was running he was the singer of a tribute band for Judas Priest.
Okay.
And he became the singer of Judas Priest.
That's amazing.
Right? It's like a Cinderella story, and it sounds kind of like this was a Cinderella story. You're listening one day, you're listening to the changelog, the next day you're on the changelog.
Yeah. It was very surreal the first time that I was on the show, because I wrote for the website for a while before I was on the show, because Andrew was at Pure Charity. Andrew moved on to Stripe, I think he went to.
Yeah.
He went to work at Stripe, wasn't going to co-host anymore. And eventually I came into the co-host role. But I remember the first time I was on, it was like a reunion episode with me, you, Steve Kalabnik, and
Kenneth
Andrew.
Reitz.
Yeah, Kenneth Reitz and Andrew was on the show as well. There was like 5 of us, and we were just kind of shooting the poop.
It was supposed to be live every week, and I think it was the first and only live show.
Yes.
I could be wrong, but we had ambitions.
But it was very strange hearing my voice on the show that I'd been listening to for all those years. That was back in 2012, 2013 time range. Was when I got involved. So,
yeah, well, give us a little bit more background about yourself, because to even get in the position where you were contributing to these libraries, like the Twitter gem, for example, is one I used early on as a developer as well. So I didn't even realize it until you said it, but I've used some of your code. How did you ramp up? What's your origin story?
So it's somewhat humorous to me that you're asking both of us about our origin stories. We used to do origin stories on the show.
That's true.
In fact, you were on the show about 4 years ago. We might have got your origin story as well. And we stopped doing those over time because we found that they were kind of hit or miss. The first one that I remember was Kong, or Mashape, I think. Ahmad Nasri.
Yep. Yeah. Mashape.
He had an amazing origin story.
I missed that show, and I was so bummed, too.
I interviewed him by myself, and I was like, Adam, this guy had an amazing... We have to ask everybody their origin story. It's so cool. And then we started asking more and more people, and it became to where like somebody would have an amazing one, the other one would be very boring and straightforward. And so that's what you're running into right now, because Adam just had his origin story from poverty and the military and all of these things. And my origin story is very status quo for somebody in America and growing up in the 90s. I was raised by two parents who loved each other and loved me. This coming up on their 50th anniversary.
Awesome.
Congratulations.
In the suburbs of Middle America. Pretty typical public school education. Went to college, learned some stuff, got into technology, and here I am. I mean, there's not much to dig into that's unique or different. And so I don't think we need to cover too much.
Well, the one piece of your history that I do like that's kind of interesting is the government job you have planned for you after school. That's an interesting caveat that I don't know how much you want to share about that, but that's an interesting caveat to your story.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are some things in there that we might be able to dig into. So I've always considered myself to be a cautious opportunist. And so when I see opportunities in my life, I just kind of cautiously go into them versus either like rambunctiously going in or
jump right in
or not go in. So like that's kind of where I've been. And even with the changelog, this was not like I decided, hey, this is going to be a new part of my career. I was just more like, I could contribute to the blog. Like I saw a need and I kind of started, and it just like slowly steamrolled. And so that's the story of my education as well. I wasn't into software. I wasn't into technology. I got my first computer. I was 18 years old, which is relatively late for a lot of developers. The only thing I did on it was Napster, pretty much. And then I played video games. A friend of mine in high school told me I should apply for a scholarship. There's a thing in Omaha called the Walter J. Scott Scholarship. Walter Scott is a guy who's done very well for himself and has a scholarship for certain students to go into technology industry and then stay in Omaha. It's kind of his deal.
That's cool.
I had never heard of it. My friend said, hey, you should try this out. It's an IT thing. And I was like, IT, what's that? I was like,
is it internet things?
Right. I mean, I was actually planning on being an architect. But I wasn't like passionate about art. In school, they kind of like make you pick something. And I had done pretty good on the CAD machine. Like I could draw a thread, And I remember my CAD design teacher was like, you're going to make a great architect one day. I'm like, okay, I'll be an architect. And that was like the extent of my passion for architecture. But I was like, okay, I could do that. Looking back, I think I was just good at manipulating the computer to make a thread design, not the actual design itself. So I was probably just better at CAD than I was at architecture. Because I do have a knack for these things, but I just didn't know it. Anyways, my friend, Chad, told me about this scholarship. And my other friend, Aaron, had gotten the scholarship a year earlier. It's for people who test pretty well on scores. And Aaron tested very well, and I thought if he could do it, I could do it. That was kind of my attitude. So I applied for the scholarship, got the scholarship, and it included, like a computer and stuff like that, full ride to University of Nebraska. So that was really cool. And that's really what got me into software at all. I was management information systems. Which is kind of like computer science, but it's not computer science. It's like they try to sell it as the best of both worlds of like business and computer science together. I found out that actually means like the least of both of those worlds, right? Like you're not a computer scientist and you're not
Exactly.
a business person either. And so it's kind of like just a lukewarm version of either of those other majors.
Right.
Don't recommend it. Just go computer science if you are going to go to a 4-year school.
I second that recommendation.
Or just start on freeCodeCamp. And I didn't really learn. Yeah, second that.
I would encourage people to still go to school if you have the resources to go to school.
Yeah. I would too. There's lots of routes. So I'll say this: everybody needs something a little bit different, and so for some people, a free code camp is like 100% the way to go, even if they have the resources. For some people, a boot camp, like an in-person immersive but still short thing, is a great way to get started. They can go from there. For other people, they may need a 4-year degree before they go into it. Your age matters, your life circumstance matters.
Absolutely.
And so there really is not like a single solution to rule them all, which is why I love how many options there are and how it's like an ecosystem. Anyways, a little bit off topic.
I like that though. I mean, a lot of facets to how you can learn. That's what's important.
Right.
The important thing to communicate is there's not one way that rules all. Your way may be different than mine or Jerod's or Quincy's, and it's just a matter of persevering through it, getting over the humps and hurdles.
Right.
That sometimes, I mean, that's why it's hard, because hard things, if it was easy, everyone would do it. It's hard because it's worth doing. So persevere, find some friends or your tribe to, guide you through or support you through. Get people around you, mentors, all that stuff. So there isn't one way that's the best fit for everybody.
Yeah, so I cautiously walked into that opportunity, and it worked out, and that moved me off the architecture track and into the computer world, so to speak. I didn't really learn very much about computer systems in the first few years of my college. That's just an unfortunate fact. Some of that was me. A lot of that was the school. My last year, I found another potential scholarship, and I liked scholarships because it's free money. And this one was cool. So a cool thing about the Walter Scott Scholarship is it's stackable. And there's actually a term, I can't remember what it is, but certain ones you get like a full ride and you're done. You can't actually get other scholarships. Well, for enterprising students who would rather get scholarships than like jobs, like myself, you could find ones that's stacked, and if you can get those, then you're basically getting more money. So I found another scholarship called the National Science Foundation Scholarship for Service, and it was all about information assurance. And so this was like a push into getting some of these CS people and MIS people into software security. So assurance that your software is...
Information assurance. I haven't heard that, but it's like quality assurance and information security kind of mashed up.
Exactly. It's like, how sure are you? Can we be sure about our systems? And so it was very much a government thing. It was 2 years of schooling, which stacked on top of my other scholarship, with a concentration on information assurance, which was a new thing at the university at the time. I think it still exists. But it's basically, I learned penetration testing, securing and hardening systems, defense in depth, all these security concepts. And then I was supposed to go into attached to that is 2 years to work with a government agency upon graduation. So it was really great. I actually learned a lot in that program. You learned the really nitty gritty of how systems work, networks especially, and how insecure they are and ways that you can pick those things apart. Upon graduation, there was a hiring freeze in the government. And so we had a circumstance where, sometimes the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. Well, on the right side of the government's hand, they were creating a new scholarship for service to get all these new bright young minds to go work for a 3-letter agency. And on the left-hand side, they had a hiring freeze on. So we were the first class that did the scholarship. There's 200 of us nationwide, and there were no jobs for us, but we had this agreement.
Commitment.
Yeah, a commitment, a 2-year commitment. And so it was kind of like...
make you peel potatoes for 2 years? Or
well,
what
they
happened?
wanted us to wait. Sit around and wait.
Really? They expected you to wait for just 2 years before starting your career?
Yeah, sit around and wait. So that was unfortunate. So I was in this weird, no man's land where I was graduating. I had this commitment, but there was no job to actually fulfill the commitment. And so what was I supposed to do? Well, in that time frame, this is like when I was in the 21 to 23 time range. At age 22, I became a Christian, and I started to attend a local Bible church in Omaha, and I really felt like it was important for me to stay there. While I was there, I met the pastor, who's also an IT guy, and ran a software company with a networking need, and he was like, I'll put you to work. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah, in fact, you can work for me as long as you want. And then if they come knocking, then you can just leave. Like, most people, it's hard to find a job in that place because you're like, by the way, I might have to quit at any moment's notice and go work for the government. He was like, he did that for me.
Oh, stand-up guy.
Yeah, spectacular. Changed my life in many ways, that guy. His name's John Malone. And he also thought it was ridiculous that they were basically holding this commitment to us. And so he helped me petition the school and the system, and basically they let a lot of us just off our commitment because there's no jobs. And so he was instrumental in, providing for me during that time period, and then also helping me to get that commitment raised. And so I just kept working for him. I was like, well, this worked out pretty well. He helped me out when I was in a bind. He's a software guy, and he from way back in the day. He knows all the nuts and bolts of like the old school software guys, and he's got work for me to do. So I just worked for him for a while. I was never really consider myself a programmer back then. I was kind of like networking scripter. I consider myself a scripter.
It's funny how reluctant people are to consider themselves
Developers.
programmers or
I
developers.
know.
Like, I'm not quite a developer.
I know. Like I took some of the developer, like I took C++ and I took C programming, which I actually liked more than C++. We could talk about that, but we probably won't. And I learned Perl. And as a penetration tester, as a person who's like trying to break into systems and stuff, or find holes, or even as a script kiddie, like there's a reason why they're called script kiddies is because they don't have the skills of a cat, but they got the scripts. And so I would learn scripts, I would read scripts, I would write scripts. I consider myself like an automator. And so I wrote a lot of Perl scripts. And then I found the Ruby programming language, and I was like, why would I write Perl scripts when I can write Ruby scripts?
Kind of the spiritual successor to Ruby.
Yeah, in lots of ways.
To Perl,
Yeah, I borrowed a lot of the great things from Perl and then discarded some of the things, some of the warts. And so I started writing Ruby. I knew some Perl, I knew some Ruby. I consider myself a networking guy. Like I ran some mail servers, and I would automate a lot of things around that job. So while I was working for John, I automated a lot of the things that he had for me to do on the network. And so I could either twiddle my thumbs at work because I had automated all my responsibilities, or I could continue learning my skill, establishing my skills. And so I was tweaking WordPress blogs, mostly my blog. It's kind of like Pimp My Blog early in the day.
Yeah.
Where I had this blog. It was probably slightly better than Adam's in terms of like content, because it was like I was trying to write interesting things. It wasn't what you said. It was like family photos and stuff.
Pretty much.
Yeah, a little bit more general.
An occasional personal thought, but nothing very profound.
And I was writing about software and just blogging. And I really it was a WordPress site. I really wanted my latest. I remember when I started realizing, I can just program websites. There was like a flip in my mind. And it was, I wanted my most recently played iTunes songs in the sidebar of my blog. Because this is the blogosphere days.
Yeah. You were trying to share kind of the little things you're doing.
I wanted to pimp my blog. Like I
Yeah.
wanted cool stuff in my sidebar. And so I had to basically start writing PHP. Like I wrote a WordPress plugin or something like that. And it talked to the iMac at my house. I can't remember exactly the details. And I got it done, and that was really cool. And then I was like, okay, what else can I do with my blog? Started like integrating the Flickr stuff into
That's right.
all these
Flickr,
mashups.
not Instagram, Flickr.
That's right, back in the Flickr days. And we were just mashing stuff up back then. That was the cool thing. Open APIs, mash them up, come up with something new. I loved that stuff.
Mashups, yeah.
And so that's when I started thinking, you know what, I could just do this for other people because it's pretty cool. And I saw the power of the web platform, really. And I was like, every business needs something like this or could be advantaged by having one. Like today, it's kind of table stakes to have a certain web presence, but back then, we're talking 2006, it was not table stakes. It was a competitive advantage, So I started helping people do that kind of stuff. I learned Ruby on Rails, and because I had this job where I was doing networking, but also this boss who was like, "Hey, you've achieved all of these goals that we need. If you can go make money another way, go ahead and go do that." And so I started bringing basically freelance consulting clients into his business and operating on like a one-on-one basis with them. And I did that for years. And that's kind of from that eventually I went out on my own and started my own entity doing very similar work, bought my customers from him, still great friends to this day. It wasn't like that. Started doing it on my own. And in that circumstance is when
It was like, fly away, bird. Fly away.
Yeah, exactly.
You graduated.
Yeah, so under those circumstances, I could help out with the changelog. And so that's in 2012 is when I hooked up with Adam and Wynn.
You're hearing this somewhat for the first time, right? I mean, and kind of I am too. I'm kind of mind blown that what's interesting about the story of success, right? This overnight success actually took many years. And then when you dig into the details, you get to see all the little things that sort of had to happen to make things successful or happen, right? Like if Jerod wasn't fortunate enough in those ways to have a good friend give him that opportunity, him thrive in it, and then excel at it to a point where he can actually go off on his own and have that freedom and flexibility. Well, geez, I mean, he would have never emailed Wynn. I would have probably pod faded forever.
Right.
And it would have been just a a dead dog.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, what I'm getting from hearing your respective origin stories is there are so many people along the way who were almost guardian angels in a way and cleared the path for you to go toward your destiny of running the Changelog together.
Yeah.
One more aspect of Jerod's story that he's not sharing yet, I'm sure he might, is the same person John told him what a communicator he was.
That's right.
And he's the person that sort of like gave that insight to Jerod. So sometimes you have these truths about you that you don't know, right? It's kind of weird to like know you but not know all of you, and somebody else sees this thing in you, and he shares this with Jerod that he's a really good communicator. Tell a story, of course, but and it sort of like gave Jerod a new perspective on how he could be as good as he is in software and technology, but then also a good communicator, and to bridge those two.
Yeah, so that was one of the insights that John gave me at some point. I can't remember exactly when. I'd been working for him for a while. I'd known him for a while, and we were good friends. And he saw my programming skills, which are, I would say average to slightly above average. Like I can throw down, but I'm not going to blow anybody away. Okay. There's hundreds, if not thousands of better developers out there. Maybe tens of thousands. I don't know. We don't measure these things. Point is like, could I be the best software developer in the world? No, but I can hold my own. And then on the other side, with communication skills and the ability to write well, to think, off the top of your head, to speak to people in ways that they understand. Am I the best at that? No, I'm not the best at that either. But there's very few people that kind of play in both of those playgrounds. I mean, the stereotype of a developer, which I believe we're finally starting to break out of that mold, and I love it. There's so many different kinds of developers now, but it's like the antisocial, person in their basement, doesn't want to talk to people, I just want to code all day and drink Mountain Dew. Like that stereotype. There's some truth in stereotypes, right? Generally there's truth, and then specifically they're wrong, they're false.
Yeah.
But the general truth there is that developers are not the best communicators, and so there's very few good developers who can also communicate. And so John said to me, I didn't realize any of this. I'm looking back at it, realizing it. He said, where you're going to succeed in this industry is that you can bridge the gap between developers and communication skills. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, cool. Maybe you're right.
Oh, cool.
And then it's like, well, a podcast about software development. Yeah, I guess that does kind of make sense in retrospect. So yeah, he definitely made me aware of that as a possibility. I didn't even think about it. So yeah, we've had, I think everybody has influencers or enablers or, that drill sergeant that says you're a leader now. Yeah. I think everybody has those stories, and sometimes it takes introspection and reflection to actually think about that, because so much we're just like iterating forward and not looking back. So lots of people.
Yeah. Thank God for them too. I mean, geez. That's why I think it's so important if you're in that position. That's why I made that point earlier, and to make it again, is that if you're in that kind of position to enable somebody, what a blessing it is to enable somebody. The feedback loop is nice. It's a nice to have. It's not a need to have if you're in that position, because just help people along the way. I mean, I can't even imagine how many people have listened to your show or our show or have been influenced by FreeCodeCamp or the Changelog or whatever we're doing that we've never even heard of, that like their lives have literally changed and we don't even know.
Yeah.
We just got to show up every day, do what we do. If we say we're going to do it, do it. If we say we're going to be there, and just help people to find respect, compassion, empathy, and sometimes even the benefit of the doubt.
Right. Yeah.
Not everybody's bad, not everybody's good, but finding that balance and encouraging somebody and being that person. That's what I love most about what we do is being able to influence people's lives and to love on people.
And I know we're not to that part of the interview yet, but I would just say the impact that you've had with FreeCodeCamp in the first 5 years, we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing to watch what you've done there, and the amount of people whose lives you've helped. I mean, it's astounding. I mean, I read those numbers that you put in that blog post, and I was just like, wow, this is some serious impact, and like, that tide is rising a lot of people's ships, and it's really cool. So
thank you.
Props to you on that.
Thanks. I'm doing my best. Just like you all. I'm just trying to be consistent.
Yeah.
The 3 C's, right?
Yeah.
Well, why don't you just go ahead since we mentioned the 3 C's?
Yeah. This is something that I had kind of recognized whenever I thought about the recipe for success when it comes to producing a podcast or basically any sort of piece of content. You have basically 3 C's. You got quality content or just content.
That's like you.
Produced on a consistent basis to a community of people. So if you're producing content that's good, that people want to consume, enjoy, share, like, whatever it might be, on a consistent basis, or at least something where you set an expectation, hey, I'm going to do a show every week, and then that's your rhythm, that's your cadence. Yeah. And then if you wrap all that around to a community, or either develop a community or do it for a community, then you're going to have some success, because that's all it takes. You could be talking about knitting, you could be talking about software, you could be talking about cameras and lighting, you could be talking about microphones, whatever. If you do that on that kind of rhythm, that kind of basis, with that kind of focus, you'll find success. And that's
not easy to do either.
No, it's not.
The 3 C's it's nice to remember them, and it is somewhat easy to say, even though you throw the Q in there, it might mix you up. But it's easy to say. But especially the consistency part, like you said, Quincy, you're just trying to be consistent.
Yeah.
And like even now, we've transitioned into like a full blown business, and like we're established. We've been here for 10 years, but like consistency, quality content is hard as well. I feel like we've gotten better at that over the years, and you can develop an eye for it. And sometimes you still strike out, or
in our case, an ear.
Yeah, or an ear for it. Community is something that comes naturally to people who commune with other people. So you have to put effort into that, and it doesn't come without effort, but it's not as hard as consistency. Consistency is so hard, and that's why the Podfade is like a word in Urban Dictionary.
I would say, for me, I think the harder thing is community. Because it's not like Field of Dreams, build it and they come. It's you've got to be there. You got to show up every day. You got to be invitational.
So you're saying the consistency.
I think we have
with
places.
The community.
That's right.
Man, they're all 3 hard.
Yeah, they are. So I find it. I find it personally, for me, it's been a little easier to be consistent with quality content, and harder to be part of the community and develop that. Yeah. That's just, that's me. Just like with learning, you have different paths. For me, that's the area where I fail more often, I think, or don't thrive as well.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about how Jerod came on board and you had circumstances that were propelling you to professionalize the changelog, if you will.
Well, I think when Wynn left, it certainly put a kink in my thought pattern for it. Like, I had made some money, just enough to sort of like, server costs, pay the bills, make it somewhat worth it. It wasn't like we could leave our full-time jobs and even remotely consider doing that as a full-time thing. We had some early sponsors. We'd worked with GitHub early for different things when they were promoting GitHub jobs. And even then we didn't have a keen eye on how to best partner with brands to help them share their messages in ways that developers really want to hear. So relevance is one, but then also not objectifying like, oh, you should get the, just finding a way to humanize these businesses and help them reach developers in ways they just weren't able to in other ways. Like, it's not a display ad, it's not this or whatever. And I think when it became a business, the one thing for me personally, which is sort of embarrassing to even mention, as I mentioned, I was a freelancer for a while and didn't really have a, in quotes, job. I was my own self-employer, so to speak. I didn't do the best I could have done with filing my taxes properly and paying my taxes properly. And, thank God the government has an option where you can establish a payment plan, and I did. But that didn't mean that the tax debt was gone right away. So I had accumulated a little bit of tax debt, having essentially bloodied my knuckles as a freelancer. I didn't do things so well, learned how to do it better, and then corrected those things. But
yeah, and this happens to a lot of freelancers. Yeah. The U.S. tax code is complicated.
Yes, it is.
Put it lightly.
Well,
even as a nonprofit that doesn't have to pay taxes, we still spend a huge amount of time figuring out like how to report everything.
Yeah.
It's a big event every year.
Making sure you keep that designation, right?
That's even it too. Like, the difficulty of reporting it, especially as someone who's only collecting 1099s. that's really difficult. It really is. And like you're so focused on just like, at least for me, my experience was so focused on just showing up and doing that I felt like, gosh, could taxes be a little easier to do? And so I just didn't do them for like a couple of years. It's no big deal. But the point is this: what started to move it into this full-time business, even an option for it was, one, obviously we heard the backstory of Jerod and all these things sort of orchestrating and coming to be. But then two, I had just been recently married. My wife and I, we met in 2010. We got married in 2012. And this is around that time I mentioned when stepped away late 2012. And I would say 2012 to 2013 was the years we began to formulate what has become a business. It been in place since 2009, didn't really become anything business substance until 2012, 2013. And that's my wife saying, hey, you can't do, my wife just helped me as a man guard my time, because as somebody who's just ambitious, you will often just throw yourselves into things that you probably shouldn't say yes to. You probably should say no more often. And, to help me understand that and guard me from that, she said, if you're going to do this, if you're going to take time away from our relationship, our future, etc., you got to find some way to make money, make it worth it. And so what was really interesting about that is having the heart to love on and care for our community and show up and do these things basically for free. No one downloads a podcast and pays $1, right? It's all for free. But somewhere along the lines, we've got to find a way to make a business model or develop a business model that can help us do what we plan to do, which is create this awesome content and thrive in the community, do it consistently, like the 3Cs say, but have a model that allows us to operate that way. And so that was the hardest part, was figuring out what that model was. It gets kind of easy because sponsorship for podcasts seems to be the most typical, especially now that it's kind of become a thing. Earlier, 2009, 2012, even in that era, there wasn't a lot of podcasts. It was still early. It was before Serial and the big boom of podcasts and whatever. So, obviously it would make sense to build a business model around sponsors. Now, early version was like no sponsors, members only kind of thing. And in all honesty, I would love to run a membership driven only kind of business. That maybe not love. It would be nice. It would be fortunate to do that, but it's just not enough to do what we try to do. And so
especially back
we've tried
then
some different models.
when we tried it.
Yeah.
This was
true.
This was pre-Patreon.
Yeah.
This was really the modern era of the web, where I think people are more forward to support things that they love because they don't want them to go away. Back then it was more random. Like, it just wasn't something that people are used to doing.
Yeah.
And so maybe now it would be more feasible, whereas when we tried it, which was around the time that I joined, 2012, I remember the announcement was, I wasn't there yet. It was like, member supported only.
Right.
And I was like, really? And I was even a diehard listener. I don't think I signed up. So like, it's really hard.
That's terrible.
Yeah. Sorry, man. I signed up. I signed
this
up
is
for
$5. It was
hard to get people to
$5.
pull
It was a hard
wallets.
sell back then. Maybe it's easier now, but I don't know.
So a membership program didn't work out the way you hoped it would, but you were quick to adapt.
Right. Well, we had to. I mean, if we were if I was following my wife's advice, hey, if you're taking my time away from our time with, as a relationship and growing our marriage, then I've got to find a way to make this succeed as a business. And I thought memberships would work. I was really hopeful that it would. I still, as Jerod said, I think we've now come into a new world where they're more possible. And you also have this sort of new change where people want to support the things they love. And I think we have a small amount of people globally that would want to give that to us. And I don't want to take that opportunity away. The problem, I think, was that we were relying on that completely as a business model. And that just didn't work as a solo business model. It needed more than that. And I think for us, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity on the table. There's just so many businesses out there that are trying to reach software developers, staple partners of ours like Linode, DigitalOcean, Fastly, Rollbar, GitPrime, and help me if I'm forgetting some, because I mean, it's not like a long exhaustive list. I'm trying to thank everybody, but like some really strong businesses that want to help brands like ours do what we do, and at the same time reach an audience they couldn't otherwise reach, that's something we can latch on to. Fastly, I mentioned in particular, hey, if you listen to our show, you might have heard this phrase before. Bandwidth for Changelog is provided by Fastly. Learn more at fastly.com. We move fast and fix things here at Changelog because of Rollbar. Head to rollbar.com and check them out. And what's the last one?
We're hosted on
Linux
cloud
servers.
That's right. I messed up my own thing.
Servers.com/changelog.
That's right. That's right.
And so, stole that idea from Leo Laporte. I mean, gosh, Leo Laporte is an icon in tech podcasting.
Podcasting.
Right.
Tech podcasting.
Right.
Yes.
If you listen to their show, Netcasts you love.
Netcasts you trust from people you love.
That's right. There you go.
Yeah,
This
they
is
just changed
Twit.
to using podcasts now. I think they finally.
he was stuck on Netcasts
They were
for
really stuck on
years.
Netcasts.
He was stuck, yeah.
He had a chip on his shoulder. He got over it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then CatFly
Practically
was
right.
one of their core partners. I'm like, well, if I want to build a business around this, we've got to find some. I can even remember talking to you about this. I'm like, do you think we can get somebody to do this and give us money every month? And like other people that advise us, that's probably not possible. Good luck. Well, we did it, and we find ways to support our business in ways that just, I'm astounded, honestly. And we're really fortunate. We've done a great job, forging not just sponsorships. Like that's the sort of the industry term that's known. We're interested in sponsorship, whatever, but we look at it more like partnerships. We thrive, our business, even personally, we thrive on relationships. And so we want to work with brands that know who we are, know what we're trying to do, want to support that, but then also get paid a dividend by being able to, in authentic ways, speak to the global audience we've been able to cultivate over these years.
Right.
And do that in a way that doesn't objectify our audience or only come in for these reasons. Like it's got to be more to it than just that, And we help them speak to software developers in ways that are relevant.
Yeah. I think it's worth pointing out that podcast advertising really works in ways that other forms of advertising don't really work.
Yeah.
And so the medium is suited very well for that style campaign because you're going directly into people's ears, week by week, time by time. And if you can be a staple and supporting a show that people love and are getting for free. And so I think as listeners, like I said, I'm an old podcast junkie. I know a lot of the sponsors who are supporting the shows that I love. And I'm fine with transferring a little bit of goodwill to that company. It's like, yeah, Casper supports this show. A lot of the mainstream tech podcasts have the usual suspects of sponsors, right? Casper, Squarespace, Audible. Like these are brands that have years and years of goodwill because they've been supporting the shows that I love and because they have their hosts, the people that I love their shows, talking about their brands. It's just a very effective thing.
Yeah.
And so the reason why I think podcasts are such a vibrant ecosystem right now is it's very good for consumers because it's on-demand, niche, like listen to what you want, none of the stuff you don't want. It's really low overhead for consumers compared to radio in terms of ads. Like compare it to the radio ads where they're yelling at you for 7 minutes of the 30.
Yeah.
And then on the actual sponsorship side, they really work. These sponsorships work, whereas display ads and other things just haven't had the ROI. Like the ROI is there for the companies that believe in it. Yeah.
We've been able to really help a lot of businesses like that. Like a recent example that I was really stoked about was KubeCon. So the Cloud and Computing Foundation has this conference every, I guess, a couple times a year, sometimes in Europe, sometimes in the United States. And we've been very good friends with the Linux Foundation over the years. And then that also bleeds into the Cloud Native Computing Foundation and their conference KubeCon, which we've gone to. We love going there. We're actually going back this year. Gerhard Lazou is representing us this year, so that's awesome. But we have just ran some promos for them to promote, hey, if you're thinking about attending, use our code, save 10%, get the early bird pricing for extended times, whatever it might be, and join this kind of community and help them share that invitation with a larger community. Yeah. And their feedback to us was like, your code was the most used over all the people that we used in these promotional ways. Yeah. And I just love that because for one, everybody attending is to save 10%, but then two, like it's proof that we actually can help willing community people in the software world to hear something on a podcast and actually take action.
Right.
And it's not like I'm selling Jerod something he doesn't want with money he doesn't have.
Or even something generic.
Right.
Like if I'm listening to Go Time and I hear an ad for KubeCon, like I'm super interested in KubeCon. Like, oh, great, it's coming up. It's going to be in Brussels, or I'm not sure where it is, but
Amsterdam.
Amsterdam.
San
I want
Diego.
to go to that. These are not Burger King ads or
Right.
Crest.
We've considered the Impossible Burger ad, though. I'm just kidding.
Have we?
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
So anyway,
that was a joke.
It's proven to be a very viable model for it really is a win-win-win, just to use Michael Scott's phrase, because the sponsors do win, our partners win because of the results like that. We win because we're making a living off of it, and our listeners get free shows consistently, quality content, right? And they, we put out 60 to 90 minute shows, and you're going to listen to 2 or 3 ads in a 90-minute show. We're not asking very much. Yeah. And those ads are incredibly pointed and valuable. Like, it's content. It's like, oh, that's interesting. I'm interested in that. So it's not annoying. So I think everybody wins. I like the model.
Yeah, and that's like what they've found with advertising is if it's relevant, then it's less irksome, I guess.
Right.
And in this case with podcasts can be hyper targeted. Like, this is a podcast about open source software.
Right.
I mean, you could never get that level of granularity with like TV.
That's right.
Yeah,
and that's why some of the larger, more mainstream podcasts struggle with the sales to the sponsors, because they don't have the targeted audience. They have huge audiences, but they aren't targeted. So you'll hear a lot of mainstream ones, like even mainstream tech, like the Vergecast, which is a pretty mainstream tech news and commentary show. You'll hear them asking their listeners to take surveys and stuff, because they have a more generic mainstream listener base. They don't know exactly who they're talking to.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, when you have a show called Go Time about the Go programming language and Kubernetes and these things, you know exactly who's listening to that show.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to survey them. That's the value of a niche.
Yeah.
Speaking of Go Time, I think this is a perfect opportunity for me to ask, at what point, so you had the changelog.
Yeah.
That is the granddaddy of open source podcasts.
We call it our flagship show.
That's
the
right.
flagship show.
Our flagship show.
And now you have several. You have several that were shorter period, like Request for Commits, which was one of my personal favorites.
Yeah.
Learned a ton from that one.
Me too.
But how did you go about creating additional shows, and how do those all work?
Let me take this one.
Go for it.
Okay. So we have been working with Brian Kettleson and Eric St. Martin of GopherCon. It was their second year. Actually, I think the reason why we even did the show begins because Brian Kettleson hopped in our issues in GitHub. In our ping, we had a ping repo where we would say, "Hey, community, if you have some ideas, suggestions, whatever." We've since moved it to different ways, but we used to have a repo on our GitHub org called Ping, that's another win thing. Honestly, he's so awesome. But Brian Kettleson reached out to us on our issues there and said, "Hey, if you haven't thought about it yet, you should come to GopherCon. This is our invitation to you." And that's what I love about Brian too, is he is like the Mac Daddy of like, and I'm showing my age here too, because that's a 90s thing. He's the Mac Daddy of like inviting people in, right? Yeah. I love that about Brian and Eric. And he reached out to us. We had them on the Changelog talking about GopherCon. They invited us up to their conference. We went out there and did some fun stuff. If you go to changelog.com/films, you'll probably see some cool stuff. We've actually done some video work there with them and whatnot. And so we just sort of fell in love with the Go community. They're really, I would say, different than other communities because they just seem very. It's like once you, I don't know how to describe it. Maybe you can help me, Jerod, but just very, very protective and very close. Tight-knit. Very tight-knit, yeah.
Enthusiastic.
Yeah, and it's like once you're in, and we just loved that conference, everyone who went there, we just loved how people collaborated and mingled together and had fun together. It was just such a fun conference, and I don't know if it was the conference and the community, but we just sort of fell in love with that. And we're like, well, once we always had desires to expand. We're like, well, the next one we do makes sense to be a Go podcast of sorts. But Jerod,
Yeah.
you came up with the name, so I mean, take it from there.
Yeah, what an amazing name it is, too. It's
Well,
go time.
It's go time. Yeah, it seems obvious in retrospect. Naming is one of my favorite things. Naming things is hard, as we all know as developers. And so I love to do it because I like challenges. And sometimes it takes 1,000 bad names for one good one to be born. And we've definitely been through those 1,000 bad names because we have a portfolio of shows now. In addition to just the Go thing happening, we have with the Changelog one opportunity a week to spotlight something, and it's very polyglot, as you know, as a listener.
Yeah.
We don't have. I mean, open source is kind of the crux of the matter, but we even go beyond that, and we've even changed the word to software development in terms of the things that we talk about, because even though open source basically permeates all of software development, it's bigger than just open source even now, just because our interests have grown over the years. That being said, I mean, that's 50 weeks a year. That's 50 shows a year if you take a couple of weeks off. And there's so much more things to talk about. There's so much more things to spotlight. And we had a lot of listeners who's like, hey, I love the Changelog. I would love to hear more, but more about this topic.
Right.
Or more about that topic.
Because if we covered Go or a specific language, even for 4 weeks straight, it'd be like, well, did this turn into a Go podcast, or are you still sort of multifaceted like you say you are? And so you have to, there's one way you can diversify. You can either diversify and add more shows to that particular podcast and just diversify by, I guess, multiplication. Just picking some words here, y'all.
Divide by multiply?
Yeah. That's
so we
how
could ship more shows a week on the Changelog feed,
Yeah.
but then we would have to have like series and like people do seasons. There's lots of different ways of slicing it. But what we thought would be a lot cooler is instead of the two of us doing more shows, because you hear our voices all the time anyways, and we're here to spotlight the guest, like we want more voices. That's what we've always been about when we had the opportunities, like more voices, more people, different voices than ours. And so let's extend our network and our production skills and the tastes that we have and the interests that we have to other people, and let's enable them to do shows. And so that's what really became the portfolio. Now some of us are on, like I'm on JS Party regularly. Adam has a show called Brain Science that's himself and Muriel Reese. And so it's not like we're not on those shows, but we don't, it's not like the Changelog. They're different shows, they're different people, and we've been able to expand the number of voices on our network to much larger than ours. And so that's pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, and one thing that I think is really cool is you figured out ways to take that kind of like cool fractal logo and create variations of like radial symmetry.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I'm wearing the Changelog shirt
There
right
you
now.
go.
This is my new one. By the way, my old one's right here that I got 4 years ago. It's been washed about 100 times, but for everybody who's watching,
Love it.
this is what it looked like. You've even got a framed one over here. But yeah, Adam sent me this after I was on the Changelog 4
That's your
years ago.
old school credentials right there.
Yeah,
That's right.
the OG.
Yep.
OG.
Yeah, but the way that you've branded them all, and they've all got really cool, short, punchy names, and they have kind of a consistent sound. And a big part of that cohesive, consistent sound is Breakmaster Cylinder.
Yeah. Okay.
Can you tell us about Breakmaster Cylinder?
Not much, because we don't know much, honestly.
The mysterious
Breakmaster Cylinder. Well, it's interesting because I obviously heard of Breakmaster Cylinder through Gimlet Media and the work they've done with Reply All and Startup and other shows. So that's where I learned about Breakmaster Cylinder. And just one crazy night on the internet, like most things happen, I was like just figuring out Breakmaster Cylinder, the kind of stuff they're into, whatever. And I turn up their website and there's like an invite to reach out. And I thought it was like typical contact me kind of scenarios where you reach out and they just never talk to you, right?
Right.
There's no response. Well, like the very next day, Breakmaster gets in touch and says, I love what you're doing. Let's work together. I didn't expect that. That turns us into the scenario where Jerod and I are sort of riffing with Breakmaster on some different ideas for brand new music for the Changelog podcast. And I think, was it Go Time?
It was Go Time and RFC. And the reason why Go Time was so important, so this was kind of a milestone for me, or like, okay, we're going to do this for real, because up until this point, so
Right.
the original Changelog had the California song, which has a tight story with Adam and a band that he knows and all that. But then we also just had some, like, Adam would go out onto, I don't know, Sound Forest or what are these websites? Like,
Yeah.
like the sound equivalent of Theme Forest.
Premium beat.
Yeah, and just buy something, and you get it's a royalty or you pay a license fee.
Yeah.
But it's not an exclusive license. And so he would just pick music he likes. We put that at the front of our shows. That would be our theme song. It was like that for a very long time. And in fact, when we expanded from just the Changelog, Go Time was our second show. When we did Go Time, Adam found this song that was...
Sorry.
It's all right.
Don't worry about it.
It was Beloved. And it was probably on the first, 10 to 20 episodes.
Yep.
Of
Enough
Go
where
Time.
people were like, don't change anything.
Yeah, so we had some resistance on that one. But what happened was, because it's just a sound clip that you can buy a license to, anybody can do that. And it showed up in a commercial. What commercial was that?
Disney.
Yeah, Disney. So somebody,
Luckily, it was tasteful.
One of the Go Time listeners is like, why is the Go Time theme song on this Disney commercial? And we were like, okay, that was what it was like. We have to get our own music.
Yeah, it was, and it happened with our show or our music on the Changelog too. It was a John Deere commercial or a Craftsman lawnmower commercial, and it was like this grungy rock kind of. And then also that can put people off too if it's too rough.
Some people over the
it's not really
years would
inviting. We
complain
wanted to be
about
inviting
our-
with everything.
Our Changelog theme music. So what was funny about that was,
It'd become clear we weren't unique, and if we had licensed music, we wouldn't be unique.
right. So we started working with Breakmaster Cylinder and with the Changelog and RFC, which was a great show and had, I think, to this date
The best
theme music, which we don't use now because that show's retired. But we should somehow remix that. It was Greenfield. Like, okay, people knew the Changelog song, but we weren't trying to, they weren't in love with it. So we could just start new. And with new shows, it's always brand new. Well, with Go Time, the Go Time crew, the listeners, which we said is a very tight-knit and enthusiastic and very active audience, they already loved this song. And now we had to replace it with a custom song. And so we asked Breakmaster Cylinder to basically make a different version, make
a remix of it.
Make it Breakmaster, but make it us, but also make it kind of sound like the one that's already out there.
Yeah.
And some people didn't even notice when we swapped it in, but some people were mad.
Some people, yeah. We always, when Breakmaster hands us anything to listen to, I'm always like, doesn't have enough BMC in it. Can you do these glitches? Like BMC is just, Breakmaster Cylinder is just known for certain things.
Yeah.
And or can you bring in some of these, trademark Breakmaster Cylinder stuff? So we always love, to speak very well of Breakmaster Cylinder. We keep saying this name. We don't know, guy, girl. We're not sure if it's one person, many people. We've never met them. We don't really have a first name basis at all besides maybe Breakmaster. That might be first name.
Right.
Just cutting off
Drop the
cylinder. But they're in our Slack. So, hey, if you're out there and you're like, I want to talk to Breakmaster Cylinder, well, go to changelog.com/community, join that, hop in our Slack and DM or say hello. That's just that easy. But I'm always talking to Breakmaster about different stuff we're working on or just catching up. They'll just reach out and say, hey, how you doing? And we'll have a 20-minute conversation and 3 weeks go by and that happens again or something like that. So,
yeah.
But so easy to work with. So not even what often happens with creatives is they're very attached egotistically to what they've done. Their creations are often a variation of their identity. With Breakmasters, there's zero of that.
They just throw it out.
They're just you don't like that? Cool. Let's keep riffing. Let's keep riffing. Let's keep
Great.
riffing.
They kind of professional detachment from
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
artistic work.
Always willing to Breakmaster is one of the scenarios where I can see they always deliver way more than you expect them to. They just want to keep delivering more and more value. That's a lesson to be learned. Always deliver more value to the people you're working with. And
if you think
can't do
code
that.
reviews are hard, reviewing somebody's music that they're creating for you is incredibly difficult.
And it's custom.
And you don't even know, we don't even have the language to describe, and I'm expecting from Breakmaster side, similar to a code review or even a feature review with a user.
You can't speak my language to critique
you
me?
can't do that. You're almost offended by how juvenile the feedback is.
Make
That's
it pop.
very, yeah, exactly. So when you're trying to give feedback, I can imagine from the other side, they're who are these fools? I don't like that hi-hat at 8 seconds, whatever. How do you, we're always it's not grooving enough, make it a little more poppy. The stuff you're saying, it's very difficult. So
very
extreme grace.
And they're talking in time code and maybe even majors or minors or
and we're take that
key it's in.
wubble wubble, take that wubble wubble out of there,
The naming is even cooler too. When Breakmaster hands us new stuff to listen to, it's always got these unique names attached to it, and it's like this one with a little bump or something like the file name is literally named some really interesting stuff. So it's just a lot of fun working with Breakmaster, and I'll say, you know, having done all of our shows, redone the song for the changelog and all that stuff, like having only Breakmaster Cylinder stuff, it would be a sad day in our history if we never got to have a Breakmaster. And I'm kind of getting a little bit weird about it, but like if something ever happened to Breakmaster and we couldn't ever work with them again for whatever reason, whether it's they move on or something bad happens, who knows, I would be really, like, it would be a day I mourn. Like, I love working with them, and they produce the best stuff, and we wouldn't use any other music besides Breakmaster Cylinder music.
That's a pretty strong endorsement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just because they're just so easy to work with. They get our DNA, they get our branding, they get what we're trying to do. And I just feel like they just add this special flair that, like you'd mentioned, the artwork. Well, there's a reason why. Because we sat down in a room for 2 days, basically in a bunker with Jake Stutzman and what was it the guy's name? Micah.
Yeah, Micah.
I can't remember his last name though. Micah Frost or Fost, something like that. Can't recall. But Mike, you're awesome too. But we basically sat down and said, hey, who are we? How can we understand what we want to be? And how can we create a brand, both a visual brand and a voice, you know, how we speak brand? And, you know, from that, we got our artwork, we got these concentric circles, we got this framework for developing new album art. And then from that, we also knew, well, if we're this unique here, we have to be this unique in our music too. You know, the ways we audibly present ourselves.
Yeah. Well, it shows. And also the design of the changelog.com, that everything kind of reinforces that visual design, that visual identity that you all have established for yourself. And now I really want to learn more about the website. My understanding is it's written in Elixir, it's snappy, and it just has really good, clear user experience. Like you know exactly what is going to happen when you click on different things, and everything's pretty clear. For me, it's been a real benchmark, and we've taken a lot of inspiration from it with freeCodeCamp and our recent efforts at redesigning and simplifying and things like that. So
thank you.
Yeah. Who did most of the design? Like, what's the story behind the platform?
So it's everything's a team effort, and I think one thing that you might notice through this conversation is that we do sweat the details. We have a few sayings that we use internally. One is slow down to move faster. We also say what's the one? Stop.
Slow.
Well, slow and steady wins the race.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff about being slow. Slow down and check yourself.
Slow down and check yourself. That's my favorite.
Yeah. So because we can get moving, we can get out over our skis a little bit.
Well, too often in anything, you feel like, especially when there's opportunity and you're ambitious, all too often do the opportunities trump your ability to say no, right? And the next thing you know, you're going in places you don't really want to for other reasons. And it's like, if you feel pulled in anything you're doing beyond your capacity, slow down and check yourself.
Right.
That's what we said.
That's right.
I had to do the hand like that. Slow down and check yourself.
Slow down and check yourself.
Because if you have, some DNA and some guidelines, so if we know that we want to, slow down to move faster, or retreat to attack, or to slow down, or slow and steady wins the race, if we have those as sort of like underlying mantras to ourselves, well, anytime we get pushed beyond those, slow down and check yourself.
Yeah.
And it's worth reminding ourselves of these things because we are in an industry that moves so fast.
Yeah.
And the pressure is to, move fast and break things is the unfortunate, slogan of a major player in our industry, which we don't like that saying at all. So slow down and move faster that way. Even when you think about software development practices, right? Like thinking things through up front is slower, but you also move faster in the long run. Setting up that test harness, right, before you move on to writing the code is slower, but you move faster in the long run.
Yeah.
People who are TDD advocates, they will say the same thing. Like you think through things first and you move a little bit slower, and it seems like you're not getting that head of steam, but 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now, 2 years from now, you're moving a lot faster. And so the brand is an evidence of that. It's like we took the time, we slowed down, spent 2 days in a room, and then many more beyond that. That was like the foundation of like building this system and this design and then we can extend it over time. We can move faster on new things. We have all this stuff in place. And so a lot of the website is a result of those initial branding discussions. A lot of the design is done either by Jake or by Cody Peterson, who is a longtime contributor and really co-laborer with us on the project. He does a lot of our front end, a lot of our design work, and then added on myself, whether it's giving feedback or cranking out the code that renders the pages. So I've done a lot of the actual software work on building the Elixir app, but everything we do is team efforts.
I think one interesting thing to note is the fact that Jerod said earlier, I was a Perl guy, then I was a Ruby guy, and so I built the site in Elixir. I mean, that this doesn't equate, but maybe you could share why.
Yeah, I mean, so I've always been a polyglot, and I like programming languages. I like the Go programming language, even though I don't write it on a daily basis. I like a lot of languages, and so I've never found one that didn't have any redeemable qualities. I even like aspects of PHP, even though it has probably less redeemable qualities in regard to syntax than many others. Slight dig. I like PHP too. We talk to a lot of people about programming languages. I mean, that's one of the things about our work is we're exposed to everything. In fact, I was just thinking about something that came mainstream recently, and I was like, we did a show on that 3 years ago. Like, it's not boasting, but just like reality.
Right.
Like, we are uncovering things before they blow up. In fact, we have a Changelog Nightly, one of our emails that goes out every single night. Its whole point is it automatically just gets the most starred repos on GitHub before they blow up is the idea, or right as they are. And maybe those things are going to go on to greatness. Maybe they aren't. We'll pick through them and try to find the ones that are interesting.
Yeah.
But it's an indicator. So we're just because of what we do and our show, we're just at the forefront. And so we talk to a lot of people about programming languages. And some people assume, therefore, we're like deep into these things or we adopt everything. And it's like, no, like 99% of the stuff, we hang up the call on a Wednesday afternoon. I'm like, Adam, I got to check this thing out because we just spent 90 minutes with a person who's got something cool they created.
Yeah.
And I'm excited because I get excited about, cool stuff. Jamstack. I think that was the one where Jamstack's becoming to be like a mainstream top. You guys rebuilt your stuff in Jamstack. We did the show on Jamstack
2 years ago, at least
2.5 years ago. And that's just because I saw the Smashing magazine. I mean, they were really the ones that were forefront of that with Netlify. We had the Netlify team on. We talked about Jamstack, and now it's becoming a thing that. But then there's other things that we talk about, and they don't become a thing. So that's just a fact of how the industry works. Point is we don't then adopt all of the stuff that we talk about. That would be, impossible and ridiculous to do. But there's certain things that catch your eye, and almost nothing do I follow up on because we move on to the next week or the next show. And we have other things to do. But Elixir actually did catch my eye, and I tried it, and I fell in love with it, and I wanted to use it. And so that's why it was written in Elixir.
And it extends from Ruby.
It takes a lot of impression. It was created by a prominent member of the Ruby community. Yeah. And so it looks Ruby-ish when you look at it. But the more you get into it,
but it's not Ruby.
It's interesting. It's almost kind of like there's DNA that goes back to Perl through Ruby and now to Elixir.
Yeah, and the thing about the Elixir combination there is it's like I wouldn't call it a facade, but it's more like a carrot on a stick. It's like something that attracts you and you're like, ooh, this is interesting. And then as you figure it out, you're like, actually, this isn't what I thought it was, but it's still very interesting. It's almost like, calling it lipstick would be another bad analogy, but there's something to it where the Ruby relationship is there because Jose, who created Elixir, knows Ruby inside out and he knows all the best stuff. And so when you see it, it almost looks like Ruby code. But then when you start to learn it, you realize, oh, this is something entirely different. And yet I feel at home, even though I'm in a completely new paradigm, which is functional programming.
Yeah. Changelog.com, of course, is open source. You've got a whole lot of contributors, not only contributing to that platform itself, but also contributors who are hosting shows.
Yeah,
who are some of the key people within the Changelog?
Somebody to name.
So many. We've mentioned a few by name. Cody Peterson is a key player on the website with the brand, with the design work. Jake was crucial to developing the Changelog brand guidelines and the album art. BMC we talked about in great depth. Gerhard, you mentioned Gerhard is going to KubeCon on our behalf. He's been working with us for a couple of years on infrastructure, really helping us roll out.
Since, well, I guess, when we first rolled out the site on 2016 on Linode.
Yeah, exactly. So I didn't really know how to roll out an Elixir app in a way that was old school. I'm very old school, like SSH into the box and run to start Apache or Nginx by hand, and that just isn't really the smart way to do things if you can do them better. So Gerhard has really helped us pave the way of doing smart ways of rolling out our infrastructure over the years, and is going to be representing us at KubeCon, which is very cool. So thanks to Gerhard. Mm-hmm. And then, as you said, we have more than just our one show now. So we have a couple shows which are panel shows, and we love the variety there. So JS Party, which is all about JavaScript and the web, has 9 regular panelists, myself being one of them. Any particular episode has 3 or 4 people on it. Sometimes there was a guest. So we just kind of mix and match, really borrowing from the Cheers model, as I call it. Mm-hmm. Remember the show Cheers?
Yeah.
Where you just want to go where everybody knows your name. The idea there is that you're at a party or you're at a meeting. GoTime's the same way, by the way, now. You go to a place where you want to hang out with people, and it's it doesn't have to be the exact same voices every single time, but there's regulars, and there's that familiar voice, and it's a place to go where you're going to get variety, but you're also going to get familiarity, just like Cheers. And when you go to the bar and you go back and watch the show, some episodes are about this person, some are about that person, and so that's really the model that we came up with for JS Party, which is they don't have to be the exact same hosts every single time, but you should have regulars. And so we have 9 people who kind of just mix and match, and then we invite guests. We could definitely name each and every one of those. I'll just go
Good
ahead.
luck.
Yeah, so
I don't even know I know the names, but I don't have them in my mind.
Yeah, Sue Sinton, Faraz Abuka DJ.
Good job.
Kevin Ball goes by K-Ball. Nick Nisi, who's a fellow Omahan, is on the show.
Hoy.
Hoy hoy, that's his tagline.
Chris Hiller.
Yep, Christopher Hiller, Bone Skull. He's the one of the maintainers of the Mocha.js test library. Mm-hmm. Divya Sasadaran.
Yep.
Short Div on Twitter. She's awesome. She's on the show. Have we gotten to 9 yet? Myself.
Emma Vedekind.
Yep. And I think that rounds it out for now. I was counting Michael Rogers. Yeah. See, I was counting on my fingers, but I wasn't actually counting. I was just doing the visual.
Yeah.
And so I lost count.
Rachel White, who hasn't been back, but she's trying to come back.
Yep.
It's been a while she's been on, but I love hearing from her as well. She's got an awesome laugh. I love her laugh. And so much fun, too. I'll try GoTime. Jeez, man, I'm going to probably stumble on some of these. Matt Ryer, of course. Love Matt. John Calhoun, Johnny Borsico, Carmen Ando, Ashley McNamara, JBD.
That's 6.
Mark
That's
Bates.
Mark Bates. That's the cast. That's 7
I think
people.
so. I feel like I'm missing one.
Did you say Johnny?
I did.
Okay. Should pull up the website.
Well, and obviously the original cast, I can't forget those guys
All right,
either.
Brian Kettleson.
You got Carlicia Pinto, you got Brian Kettleson, you got Eric St. Martin. Now, we started that show, how many years ago? Many years ago.
Probably 3 years ago.
2015.
Maybe 4.
2016 we launched that show. And, we learned a lot of things from JS Party, not to sort of explain why the cast is different, but just to sort of evolve that a bit. We learned some things about JS Party and the fact that this whole Cheers motto that Jerod just mentioned, but it's really nice to hear more than just a few voices. And then also sort of what I look at is representation of a community, so rather than just, 1 or 2 or 3 people that are always on the show, why not have a rotating cast like we've learned from JS Party? But one layer past that is those are people that are out in that community, sort of bringing their perspective to it, and then even bringing in content or different topics that the 3 people or the 2 people or whatever don't always see. It sort of gives you a larger, more wider perspective, and then also this opportunity of fresh voices, more representation, and that's why that show's also evolved to sort of borrow and learn from a lot of what JS Party's gotten right.
It's also worth pointing out as a podcast hack that in addition to all those things that we just described, which are great virtues of that format, is that we want to have great people on all of our shows.
Yeah.
And the thing about great people is they're very busy. And so it's very difficult to get the same great people week by week at the same time to show up and do a show prepared and all the things that are required to put together a good show. So we learned that because we started those shows with a smaller cast. And so one of the things we adjusted, and it's worked out very well, is like with 3 great people, it's hard to get all 3 of those together all the time. And so scheduling is one of the major challenges of podcasts. Another reason for podfading. With 9 people,
So much easier.
We can get 3 people together out of 9.
Yeah.
And it's less pressure on us as panelists.
And even if they're unprepared or not as well prepared as they'd like to be, it's not, especially if you got a lot of gelling or cohesion in the folks involved, it gets a lot easier to sort of like throw a show together last minute if it came down to it.
Right.
You know, it's just a lot more flexible too.
Yeah, and less pressure on us as individuals. So one of the things about the consistency of a podcast is, let's face it, you're just not excited to do it every single week, or you have a conflict, or that topic is not necessarily something you're into, or that guest is somebody that's rubbed you the wrong way, or what. There's 1,000 different reasons. And if you're the only person that does the show, well, you're going to do that show, right? But if you have a cast of 9, somebody could take a month off, and the show goes on.
Yeah.
And like we want the shows to go on. And so that's one of the reasons, that's the other reason why we've moved to, in those particular shows, a panel format.
Also just to spread the burden, because what would happen in that case isn't just that they couldn't show up, it's that they would feel guilty for not being able to.
Right.
And then that leads to a spiral of burden, burnout, guilt, all these things that sort of like plague us, this sort of self-voice saying you should do this or you should do that or you should, all these things that make you feel bad for not doing the things you want to do because you have ambitions or you got a busy schedule or you got a new job or whatever it might be. We like that because somebody could be a panelist on one of our shows and take a quarter break. Like they've got a teaching thing or a new job spun up or they've got some travel planned. No big deal. It gets a lot easier to collaborate and work with us because we're flexible. We're, for lack of better terms, we say family first is the easy way to say that. But
and you both have kids.
Yeah.
So you can empathize with
life.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Life, period. Yeah. I mean, you got a sick kid, you got vacation, you got whatever, going to see parents, going to see family, whatever it might be. We want to bake that in. So, because I think what happens is you start to form relationships that get very rigid and very tested because you just can't measure up every time. You're not excited about the topic. You've got a busy schedule, whatever it might be. If you bake that flexibility into how things work, now that those shows in particular work well. Now the Changelogs, Jerod and I, essentially talking to somebody that's several shows where I can't show up or I'm busier or whatever might be it. Jerod takes over no problem, or I'll take a show by myself, whatever. But it's different for those shows. That's not how we do those shows. Those shows that are more community-focused shows need that. One, it needs that community representation, but then also that flexibility to enable people to say yes and be a part of it.
Yeah, I think there's something important there beyond Changelog with regard to sustainability in your work, because as you can tell, we care about this work a lot, and it's something that started as a hobby and was a passion, and we're still passionate about the things that we're doing. But we do not want to create a thing that then becomes our lives and defines us as humans. And we wouldn't want that for any of our collaborators as well. We live in an industry and we serve an industry that deals with burnout all the time.
Yeah.
In fact, I got burned out on talking about burnout because all of our guests are people who are in this circumstance and they're all having this same terrible thing happen to them. And, it's a huge topic of conversation on our shows and in our industry in general, because it's a thing that's happening on a way too frequent basis. And we want to be in this for the long haul. We can't allow ourselves to burn out by going nonstop.
Yeah.
That's why it's one of the slow down to go faster, right? Slow and steady wins the race. We have to remind ourselves that it's okay to move a little bit slower because we have these other things.
Yeah.
And so we try to maintain, even though we have the complete flexibility and freedom to work all the hours or do whatever we want, is like, let's maintain a consistent schedule and not burden ourselves too much, because that will, first of all, burn us out, but also it's going to reflect onto the people who collaborate with us.
Right.
And they're not full-timers, right? They have jobs. They have open source projects. They're coming on our shows because this is something they want to do.
Yeah.
But you know that can create, like Adam said, the guilt and the
shame,
and like we don't want to have anything to do with that stuff.
So essentially, through having just like a really, like a lot of redundancy is the word I'm hearing. Like you have a lot of people who can step in if somebody doesn't feel up for it, or if somebody needs to take a break. Just by, it's almost kind of like a big distributed system in a way.
It kind of is.
Yeah. You've got like a pub sub system where you publish and some people sub to that. Like they're like, all right, I'll take this gig here. Hopping on this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, KubeCon. Like we would love to be at KubeCon. The timing doesn't make as much sense. Adam's having a baby. I've traveled a lot this year. One of the things we do is we'll talk about conferences. We limit our travel because that's another aspect. Like we love to go to conferences and be in the community. Love it a lot. But we limit that ourselves because, well, every time we go to a conference, we're leaving our family.
Right.
Okay, so that's a circumstance where like we want to personally be at KubeCon, but that's not going to work out. And so we have Gerhard, who's over in London, doesn't get to come to the States as often. It's going to be in San Diego. He'd love to have a trip to San Diego, and he's going to be there. And so that's a situation where it's like, okay, that makes sense. And we've just kind of slowly, built these relationships with folks where it's a win-win-win.
Win-win-win-win.
But
what's also cool, too, specifically with Gerhard, is that it gives us a chance to sort of like invite him in further to the fold. Like he's already worked with us and done tons of amazing things for us to help us with our infrastructure. But from a content perspective, we've had him on the show. We've talked about Changelog's infrastructure, but nothing specific to like giving him more opportunity, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so this was a chance for us to say, hey, we can't make it there. And rather than being like, oh, we just won't go, or or us stretching our limits and
going
and trying to go, we were like, well, who would be better to go for us, and also have other wins or win-wins behind the thing. So I mean, I love the fact that Gerhard's ready to go and he's excited because I see him behind the scenes in the emails and stuff like that, planning his trip, and he's fired up, right? And so a year from now, we may have a whole new thing we're talking about because of these. Just like with the drill sergeant, this invitation to come in. Gerhard's already a leader in other ways. It's not we're inviting him to leadership. It's the invitation into the family deeper. More things, and we think of it like a family. Really, I do, and I know Jerod as well.
Yeah, that's great to give people opportunities to just take on more and more responsibilities, and also just to travel.
Yeah, And truth be told, he'll speak much better about Kubernetes than I will.
Yeah,
just saying.
On the topic of conference, just real quick, you all do go to a lot of conferences.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to hear that you have recognized that you don't want to go to all the conferences.
Right.
Because
we want to go to all, but we don't want to go
to
all. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and the same thing with me. Like, I just need to spend time with my family, too, and the travel time, and especially depending on where you're going, the jet lag has consequences as well. So what are some conferences that you all try to make it to regularly, or what would you say? Yeah, that's the first question. I'll ask another question about conferences in a second.
So I would preface by saying that our circumstances are unique, similar to education where each person's different. So when it comes time to like pick a conference, go to a conference, you have to ask yourself, what are you trying to get out of the conference? Like, what are your goals? And that will inform which ones are a good fit, because there's so many shapes and sizes. For us, I line it up with the Changelog, the show, which is broad and polyglot and open source focused and community focused. And so we try to find conferences that are along those lines. Also, because we only get to go to a couple a year, we kind of say like maybe 4 a year, once a quarter makes sense. But we don't always hit that. Fall time seems to be like there's lots of conferences in the fall, so we tend to go a little bit more then. Is that we tend to go a little bit bigger conferences because we want to meet more people, right? We want to see more listeners or meet people that could become listeners. And so staples for us, I mean, the staple for us has been OzCon.
Yeah.
So we've gone to
that's the big one, right?
O'Reilly's OzCon the last 4 years straight, I think. Maybe 3.
Yeah, since 2016, every year.
Yeah. So OzCon's the big one. It's always a blast.
KubeCon. This will be our 3rd year back.
And then
GopherCon.
And all things open. And OzCon and All Things Open have a lot in common. I would say GopherCon's obviously a language-oriented conference, so it's different than the other ones.
Yeah.
And then KubeCon is obviously Kubernetes and all the cloud native, which is a big thing.
Yeah.
But it's not as like cross-sweeping as the open source focused one. So those are the ones that we always try to get to.
Non-interactive too. I went to that one time. K-Ball went there last year, and I think Nick's going there this year. So this is our third time going to. It's changed too, the name of it. So I think this year's iteration is just Node. I don't know if it's Node Interactive or not, but it's always been just known as Node Interactive. But since JavaScript and Node and the JS Foundation and jQuery Foundation have sort of like changed and merged and stuff like that, it had some naming changes too. So
awesome. And my other question regarding conferences would be, what would be your advice to somebody out there who's listening who has been a developer or is getting into software development, because you all know a lot about different conferences out there?
Yeah. What
would be a good first conference, and what would your advice be to them if they wanted to attend one of those conferences?
So first, small plug, we have an entire episode of JS Party called The Conference Scene, in which we do an hour, 4 of us, about this specific topic. So go listen to that if you want the long-winded version.
Sure, I can link to that, yeah.
Cool. So short-winded, my advice would be pick something small, single track. The cool thing about single track is that you don't have any decisions to make, because the less you know, the harder it is to make decisions. What do I want to go, And there's the FOMO of like, there's 3 tracks, which I might miss the good thing. Single track has a shared experience. Everybody saw the exact same thing. And so it's much easier to make conversation.
Yeah.
Because you saw the exact same talk that person did, and you don't have to say, hey, did you hear what Chris Coyer said? And they're like, no, I was in the other track.
Oh, okay. So we can't be friends.
Right. So
awkward.
Yeah. So single track is great for people just getting in, like for your first conference. Smaller size is great because it's just less intimidating, more one-on-one opportunities. So 200 people, 200 to 500 versus like a 5,000 person convention.
200 is really tight.
Yeah.
500 is a little bit more loose, but still small enough.
And then, other aspects is like regional is fun because you don't have to travel as far. So like it's less of the worst thing is like, well, I spent a bunch of money. I took 3 days off of work and I traveled across the country and I didn't have a good time, right?
Yeah.
It's a little bit less risk if it's like, well, I drove an hour and attended one.
Yeah.
So there's a community aspect to the local conferences. If you have a language you like if you're into JavaScript, then you're going to find a JavaScript conference in your local region. That's a great option. That would be my advice.
Mine is very similar.
Okay.
Small conferences are cool, especially I got fond memories of actually Future of Web Apps, also known as FOA. 2010, met some awesome people. Alan Branch, Stephen Bristol, and several other people. And like they were quintessential friends, very influential. I've gotten some of the best advice in my life from Stephen Bristol just because we literally met at a conference because we had a podcast called the Web 2.0 Show, and they wanted to meet these 2 dudes behind this show that didn't have a gigantic audience, but just enough is all it took. And they became great friends. And for a while there, I was going to smaller conferences like that, like Lone Star Ruby Conference, a couple different JavaScript conferences. I think JS, what was it, Texas JS or something like that?
TXJS.
TXJS, yeah. Was started here. Somebody else on JS Party.
Started Texas JS?
Yeah.
Alex Sexton, maybe?
Yeah, Alex Sexton. That's one more name for him.
I'm trying to remember all
round it back. But the point is just that I met some amazing friends. So like, maybe I was fortunate that, just that conference, I got to meet people. At the same conference, I also got to meet Gary Vaynerchuk and Kevin Rose. We had a podcast about with them at that conference. I happened to have lost my voice at that conference, so I sounded like DMX. And Kevin said so, which was pretty cool too. But Kevin Rose, Gary Vaynerchuk, and a bunch of other fun people. We've Kathy Sierra, who's like an icon in user experience, and just awesome. Just amazing. So some really cool people over the years that, it was a smaller conference, maybe 500 people, but I got to meet some really, really good friends personally. So that's my personal experience from it.
Awesome.
One piece of advice before we move on, those are advice on like which conferences to go to. But when you're at the conference, so nothing noteworthy ever happened when you stayed inside your comfort zone, right? You're not going to come back home and tell your significant other or your friends some great story because you went to a conference and you attended some talks and you didn't talk to anybody, and then you went to the hotel, then you flew home, or whatever the logistics were, right?
Go to the
Logistics
after parties,
interesting.
meet up
You
with
have
people.
to actually push yourself outside of your comfort zone, and it's not going to feel good because that's what comfort zone means, right? But this is your opportunity to meet, people face to face in the flesh, whether it's somebody you look up to or somebody who is sitting by themselves and needs someone to talk to. Like, if you're going to go to the conference, like, we can get virtual conversations all day long. We get them. And they aren't always that great, as is evidenced by the conversations that we have online. But in conferences, face-to-face, you can have amazing conversations with amazing people, but not if you just go and you're a wallflower.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to go and you're going to put in the effort and the money and all these things, you have to push yourself outside your comfort zone. Otherwise, you're not going to get out of it what you can.
Yeah. I got one more extra on top of that. Not just that, but we learned from Eric Holscher this thing called the Pac-Man rule.
Pac-Man
So
rule. All right.
if you're
You know this one?
I've never heard this. No.
Okay.
I'll give you the short version. There's a whole podcast about it. We'll point back to. We'll add more links to the show notes. But Eric Holscher was a big fan of inviting people and including people. And if you can imagine being at an after party or in the hallway track, whatever it might be, and you got a circle of people and there's no openings, you don't feel invited to come in, right? You don't get invited to come into that space. So if you leave that wedge there, that Pac-Man shape, well, there's room for one or two more. And then the circle will just get bigger and bigger, but you always have that gap in there to invite people in. So he gave talks about it. He wrote a blog post about it. We had a podcast about the talks and the blogs, and just inception over.
Now you're having a podcast about the podcast.
That's right.
About the
That's
talk.
right. But the point is like, if you're at a conference, describing Jerod's scenarios, one more layer to that is like always leave space to invite one more into the crowd.
Right. If you're standing in a circle, look around
Yeah.
and see if you can make more of a Pac-Man shape, because that invites one more person in.
Yeah.
So it's a great tip.
Yeah, and I've heard like keeping your body language open, where you keep your feet out,
Yeah.
your toes pointed out. That also makes people feel more welcome, and
Also, just saying hi.
yeah,
Hey, how are you?
That's a good tip.
Yeah.
looking at people,
Keeping
making
it
eye
simple.
contact with them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, they seem like obvious things, but they aren't easy. And we've all been in the awkward circumstance where like you're approaching a circle and there's no gap there, and you're like, do I wedge?
Do I just hang out until they let me ease in?
Right.
There's all
Yeah.
these awkwardnesses.
I mean, it's
about
already
that.
hard enough to get
Yeah.
outside your comfort zone and like approach somebody who may reject you or whatever the fears are. But when there's no like openness from the group, it's even harder. Anyways, we're rambling
yeah.
on
I mean,
now.
it took me years to get comfortable just approaching developers at a developer conference.
Oh, yeah.
And now, when I go
Yeah.
to some non-developer thing where nobody knows anything about me, and I'm just like some interloper,
Right.
then I have to reapply all those strategies again to like break into circles and talk to people.
Yeah.
So
It's hard every time.
Yeah.
It gets easier, but it's never easy.
yeah, it's good practice though.
Yeah.
For sure.
We're also in many cases distributed environments or very virtual environments. So the awkwardness is going to be there. It's going to be there. So I guess just own it,
Embrace it.
embrace it.
Yeah, speaking of embracing things, you all have embraced a lot of change. It's right there at the beginning of the Changelog.
That's right.
That's
name,
true.
and you're heading into a new decade, a new era of the Changelog. And it looks like the field is very open, and you've got a lot of possible things you could do with the next 10 years. What are some wild ambitions or areas that you want to explore, or charts, courses that you've already charted that you're planning to head in that you can share with us?
I'm usually more visionary and have like some sort of cast, but I feel like we're doing what we need to be doing right now. And for me, that's okay, because I think we do a lot, and I've got a growing family. And so personally right now, I feel like I'm a little short-sighted on my vision. I like what we're doing. I think there's a lot of things we can improve on. We mentioned the fact that our code base is open source. Every year we like to participate in Hacktoberfest. We like to invite people in to contribute. There's always room for more shows, but we're also not trying to grow our podcast count tremendously. I think over the next several years, we might grow by 1, maybe 2 shows a year, or basically as topics or interests, kind of come to fruition. I would like to to maybe do a bit more on the membership side.
That's what
and
I was gonna say.
invite people in that way, because there's so many people that reach out and say, how can we help you? How can we support you? And in all honesty, the best thing we can say right now is like, if you make lists of podcasts, if you're on Twitter, if you tell somebody about your favorite things and we're one of those things, that's the best way. But for some people, that's not enough, right? They actually want, for some reason, to give you money or some sort of exchange of value. And I think we got to just find out, if it's not just money or some other ways, we got to find some way to exchange value with our listeners beyond us freely giving our podcast to the world. It's got to be something where they can come in and do something of value, whether it's monetary, whether it's contribution to the code base, whether it's something involving in the community. A lot of opportunity is also on the written side. We'd love to find more people to share their big ideas through our platform. So there's a lot of things I think in that area that would make sense to expand more. Growing by more podcasts isn't that interesting to me right this very moment. It's already hard.
Yeah.
So
I think we have a good portfolio. I'm proud of it. I think we serve a lot of niches. I wouldn't say that we are comprehensive like every developer niche. There are a couple of holes. If you pin me down, I could name a couple of holes in our lineup. But I think revisiting memberships at this point makes sense because of the kind of the sea change in the attitude towards memberships. And I think we can provide unique value to a paid membership that we didn't provide back then. I think there are people who would love to support us in that way, especially if they get some add-ons and some maybe like an ad-free option or something like that. Create your own feed. Like these kind of ideas are things that we're tinkering with, where we could revisit that and really serve more directly. I mean, I love the idea of like just directly serving your audience, every single time, like the purity of that. I don't think we would ditch our current model because this model works and it's sustainable. We've proven that out, but we could augment and provide options. So that's something that we're interested in. I think personally, I agree with Adam that I'm not like super stoked to add a bunch of new podcasts. Maybe just focus on growing vertically versus horizontally at this point. In terms of my own interest, I would love to do more writing. I've just in the last 6 months or so, maybe even less, been able to finally become full-time on Changelog and slowly wind down my consulting company, which was a long burn, but we're like basically down there at that point, so I can concentrate fully on Changelog. I have lots of things to say and to write. I just don't have often the time to write them. And so I'd love to be able to execute on more of those opportunities and use our writing as a way to really augment the shows and like bring people back to the shows. So.
Yeah. Let me say this too real quick, because you mentioned earlier with when Jerod came on to the team, while you were speaking, one thing I was thinking an adjective to describe Jerod would be instrumental, right? Like if it weren't for, we didn't even talk about me going full time ever in this conversation, which is, doesn't need to go that far, but the point was that Jerod was a source of encouragement for me. He was like, I was working at Pure Charity, and so just a quick version of the story, and this is basically me giving Jerod a long thank you, is that an appreciation too, because he's an amazing partner, and I couldn't do this alone. This would not be what it is if it was Adam solo. It just wouldn't. And I'm so thankful for Jerod. But ages ago, he was like, dude, we can do this. You could do this. You could do this, whatever. I forget the exact wording, but I've always been an entrepreneur, but I wasn't like, I want to quit my job that's cushy, because I was working for a nonprofit. It was amazing work. I love what we were doing. I love the team we were building. I love what I was building. I love what I was doing. And then one day I just loved this a little bit more. And I was like, you know what, you're right. And then for me, a silent partner for me at least, not a contributor to a show, but a huge contributor to my life is my wife. If it weren't for her, if it weren't for Jerod encouraging me and saying, you should do this, we can do this, and for my wife to agree and believe in me, I wouldn't have done it, honestly. So thank you, bro.
No, you're welcome. And I'm glad that you made that leap, because, a few years later, it's allowing me to make that leap. I was already out there on my own at that point. And so there was like, I didn't have we all know that resistance of like, when are you going to, or do I, or don't I, or when do I? And so I already had the confidence. I was like, I'm out here swimming in the water and everything's fine. The water's warm out here. This kind of stuff I'd say to him.
Yeah.
And I was in that water and I was like, I like that water too, but now I've got this warm water, and I just was less also, newly married. So it was just like timing, but I still have mad respect for Pure Charity, the team that runs that. I mean, I still consider them all friends. They do amazing things. As a matter of fact, a community member, Beverly Nelson, she's done some stuff with it. It's been a while. She's been really busy, but she is CTO at Pure Charity. She began, I don't want to say just as a developer in a negative way, but she kind of came in when we had a budding team. She came in, was very instrumental. And I don't think then, she would have believed that she would have been CTO at some point. Now she's CTO of Pure Charity. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And we love Beverly. She's amazing.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you all have a lot of people who have been on the periphery or directly involved with the changelog over the past 10 years. Mm-hmm. And I want to wish you all a fun, prosperous next 10 years to the life of the changelog. I'm going to be listening. I know that a lot of the people in the freeCodeCamp community learn about open source and learn about software development in general and get introduced to a lot of the people whom you've interviewed. DHH, you had Yehuda Katz on a while back. Mm-hmm. Just a ton of really like developers. Mm-hmm. And they're able to get a lot of exposure to those people and a lot of inspiration for those people. So I just want to thank you again for everything you're doing for the community. And, long live the changelog. 10 more years of awesome learning.
That's right. Well, Quincy, you've always been a staple for us too. You've always encouraged us and congratulated us along the way too. We're obviously huge fans of freeCodeCamp. We can't say it enough. And just thank you for caring enough about us, for one, to drive from your place to my place here in Houston. We are in, for lack of better terms, Adam's studio. So he came here. We flew Jerod in for a day trip.
I mean, this is your studio.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Well, I almost called it Changelog HQ, but it's not that. We don't have an HQ. We're just a team.
Looks like a lot more like an HQ than my closet does.
But we really appreciate the time that you've put into this too, the research, and just sharing your community with ours. Yeah. Honestly, we really, really appreciate that. We can't thank you enough.
All right. Well, hey, Adam, Jerod, it's been an absolute blast. Everyone still with us, thank you again for listening to the freeCodeCamp podcast. Be sure to check the show notes where we'll have links to a lot of the different episodes of the changelog that we mentioned here and some of the articles as well. Also, if you're not subscribed to the changelog, be sure to subscribe to it. The freeCodeCamp podcast will come back in early 2020. We're just, as I said, doing a lot of other things. But in the meantime, if you can just tell your friends about the changelog, tell your friends about freeCodeCamp, that would mean the world to us. Have a fun day and happy coding.
4 years ago, we talked to you. And since then, you have literally blown up in many good ways.
Now, if he literally blew up, wouldn't he have exploded and his guts pouring out?
Okay, figuratively, literally. Jerod's always my word police.
I always do that to him.
He is.
Although technically you're right. Literally can mean the exact opposite.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on what dictionary, right? In this case, blown up meaning that... Let's start over again. Gosh.
I was digging that flow.
Oh, you were?
Yeah.
I will keep it then. We'll keep it. Jerod likes it, we'll keep it. But seriously, 4 years ago, we had a conversation with you. Much different freeCodeCamp today than 4 years ago. What are you doing that's so great? What are you doing that's so well that has gotten you to where you're at? Not just you, but the rest of everyone, the contributors.
We were pretty skeptical, were we not? I mean, we tend to be, at times, skeptical.
We're paid to be.
Yeah, we're paid to be skeptical. Well, there's lots of stuff that comes out and certain things last. I think we were talking about that earlier in the other show. By the way, kind of a companion podcast going on right here, so definitely listen to the other one as well. Links will be cross-posted.
That's right. Show notes, check them out.
I mentioned that lots of stuff hits our radar and some things last and other things don't. And I know one of the things we were talking about then, 4 years ago now, links in the show notes, the original Quincy Larson episode. Apologies, by the way, it's been 4 years for us to get you back. It should have been much faster.
Yeah, we usually have the be-backs back sooner.
You're still here. You've blown up. You did not fail to sustain. So
now you agree he blew up.
I do.
Okay, good.
I do.
Well, I think the different stuff I'm guessing is that then was just one pillar.
Right.
Now you got many more pillars.
Lots of things,
plans for more
things
pillars.
that happened.
How does that work?
Yeah, so 2014, almost exactly 5 years ago, we launched just the curriculum itself. We had a chat room, and so people would come to Free Code Camp, and they work through the curriculum, and they would ask questions in a chat room, which was originally HipChat, and then it was Slack, and then it was Gitter. We still use Gitter, but now the main thing is the forum. So the curriculum was the original pillar of Free Code Camp, and now we have a second pillar, which is the forum, which is growing really rapidly, and we've got a lot of exciting things going on there that I can talk about. And then the third pillar is the publication, freecodecamp.org/news.
Do you find it interesting that forums are cool again?
They're always
or
cool.
coolish. I mean, to some degree, sure. Like, I think social networks,
kind of the quintessential community of the internet to a certain degree.
Yes, but then you have social networks and you got groups within those networks. So it's like,
True.
What is truly a forum? So you're saying in this case, a literal forum.
Yeah, a self-hosted place where people can have threaded discussions over long periods of time, that's indexed by Google, that has its own search tools, that has accounts, that has moderator tools, all those things where the organization who's hosting that forum has control.
Complete control.
Yeah, if you contrast this with a subreddit, or if you contrast this with a Facebook group, a forum gives a lot more organization, a lot more power to the organization. And it also means that, the data stays on that server with that organization. It's not being used for advertising.
Curious how you host it. What do you do?
Yeah. We use Discourse, which is a really popular forum tool.
Yeah.
Created by Jeff Atwood and his partner, Sam. I can't remember Sam's last name.
Saffron.
Sam Saffron. Thank you. And they are really solid developers, and they also know a lot about online communities, with Stack Overflow being one of the bigger ones. So a lot of the same defaults that they bring to the table are what we use. So yeah.
What about literal hosting though? Like, do you host it yourself? What's your architecture?
AWS or?
Yeah, so it's a Docker image, and we have it on DigitalOcean.
Okay. Gotcha.
So we use a lot. We publish this whole visualization of Free Code Camp's architecture, and Discourse supports our instance. So they pay the $80 a month.
I see.
Cool.
For us to have a hosted DigitalOcean.
I was asking that because Discourse does have like a service version, right?
Yes.
Like their own host. So you're not hosted by them. You host your own, but they support it. Gotcha.
They support it, well, in the sense that every 6 months, if there's some huge thing, I start messaging them on their own meta discourse. Yeah, hey.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and we have SSH access. But if there's something catastrophic, we can ask them to go flip the switches.
Right. So the buck doesn't stop at you in terms of you host it, but you got help.
Well, Free Code Camp, the forum is one of the bigger ones. I think there are probably some bigger, I know Blizzard and
Describe
Apple.
big.
So we're getting about 5 million views a month on the forum.
Nice. And
that's pretty big.
I assume that's a lot of recurring active. There's lots of conversations.
Yeah.
Forum hits. Some people are just Googling, they find a solution in a forum, but there's a lot of people that are actually actively part of the community, posting answers, posting questions on the daily.
Yeah. At any given time, there might be 60, 80, 100 people logged in using the forum.
So let me go back and Let me go back and clarify the skepticism, because it wasn't that we were skeptical of the concept or the idea of Free Code Camp. It was really just will it continue to last? Because you're a nonprofit. There's lots of startups that are also nonprofits. They don't want to be nonprofits, but they are. But we talked about the sustainability of you pouring yourself into this. We didn't know. It was pretty new at the time. All you had was curriculum. And it was is this going to be around?
Right.
5
We're
years
also putting
from
a
now?
ton of time into, and it seemed like a lot of work. And anytime you see those things, it's just a recipe for maybe.
Yeah, for burnout.
Yeah, exactly.
Or goat farming in the horizon, right?
Right. But you're still here. You're still standing. So I guess that's maybe the question is
Not even standing, he's thriving.
Fair enough. Striving. What have you found? What's working? How did you get to this point? You have probably a team. I know you have lots of people that are working on it. So what'd you figure out that way?
Yeah, well, last time I was on, you two were both asking lots of very
similar
good questions about sustainability, because
as we do.
Yeah, and you, since you've had the whole request for commits series, which is phenomenal, I recommend everybody check it out. And I listened to that, and Nadia Egbal and Michael Rogers, and that was really helpful for me as well. Just thinking about open source and sustainability.
Yeah.
Since I visited, we finally got the 501c3 status, which is the U.S. government's tax exempt status code. It's the same one that like Doctors Without Borders and the Red Cross and all these big NGOs have.
Right.
So now, if you donate to Free Code Camp, you can deduct it from your taxes. And we ourselves don't have to pay taxes, which is a huge savings.
Absolutely.
It makes a big difference. So we were able to shift from just selling merchandise, which was the only way we were sustaining Free Code Camp, which, spoiler alert, it was barely covering even the servers, let alone, payroll and other things. And I put a lot of my savings into it. I put about $150,000 into Free Code Camp, which, keep in mind, I was a teacher and a school director. That's like, I was basically saving half of everything I earned for like 10 years.
Yeah.
And that was the money that I had, and we were going to use that to get a house or a down payment on a house in California. But
did that keep you up at nights? Like, were you confident you were going to find that thing that works, or were there nights where you're like, you know what, I'm just wasting my savings away?
Well, so I never thought it was wasted because people were benefiting tremendously, but
Right.
I was worried that it was not going to work out and I was going to have to go get a job. But really, that's a very nice first world problem to have. Like, oh my gosh, if this fails, then I'll
might
just
have
have
to
to
get
go
a
out and
job.
get a nice job as a software engineer, right?
But 10 years of your savings gone is beyond that.
What
right?
he's saying is that doesn't outweigh the risk of loss. And I guess to some degree, the belief in what you were doing enough to keep going, which you've done.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
keep up at nights though.
Oh,
That kind of risk, that kind of any fear, anything like where you were like twitching.
oh yeah. It was a long, and I had my first child about 1 year in.
It gets deeper.
So that was, and we were living in the Bay Area in a 1-bedroom apartment.
Yeah.
It was like 700 square feet, and we had a baby in there. And I was just on my laptop all day long, every day, just crunching, trying to reassure my wife that we would pull through and everything would be okay. Now, she had a job at a tech company doing accounting, and as a result, we had health insurance. So our position was already better than a lot of Americans, and we both had lots of options. So I just want to emphasize that, like, we were coming from a position of great flexibility and privilege that a lot of people do not enjoy. So I don't want to sound like at all, because really, I mean, worst case scenario, I had like standing offers from different companies that would have probably hired me and all those things. But Free Code Camp was doing great. People were using it. People loved it. And I knew that we could make it work. Where there's use, there's usefulness.
Yeah.
So what financially made it work finally? Like, it's working now, right?
Yeah. We're break even essentially. So what we did was, as soon as it became clear that we were going to get our tax exempt status, not that we actually got it quite yet, but before that, we'd always been just shifting. If you want to support Free Code Camp here, donate money instead to Women Who Code, or donate money to Hack Club, or donate money to Hacker Dojo, or some of these other nonprofits that are helping in developer education, because we really wanted to make sure that people were able to deduct things and the money was going to a proper nonprofit. So once we got the nonprofit status, retroactively, all the donations to us were tax deductible. And I remember just holding my newborn son and holding up the certification that I got from the U.S. government, and that was kind of the light at the end of the tunnel. And from there, we've just worked really hard to get a whole lot of people doing monthly recurring donations to us, which is beneficial not only because a lot of people can afford, $5, $20, even $25. We had a few people giving like $250 a month. A lot of people can afford that, and since it's monthly, it gives us the ability to project out and budget. And for an organization like us, like, we just need to be able to budget. We're not trying to make huge fixed cost investments.
Yeah.
We're just paying for servers. We're paying for people to be working on Free Code Camp full time.
So let me throw a number at you here. This comes from your 5 years of Free Code Camp post, which is on Changelog News, also in the show notes for those who missed it. More than 40,000 Free Code Camp graduates are now working in tech at companies like Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Spotify. Surely many other companies as well. That's an astronomical number, 40,000. Those are people who've been certified through the program.
Many of them have gotten certifications. That includes everybody who's in our LinkedIn alumni network, which is like 60,000-ish people who are working now in technical roles. Not everybody ultimately got the certification, because if you get a job, like, you're a graduate, right? That's the graduation.
The certification, it would be a means to an end. Once you have the end, you're not going to be like, well, I really need my FCC certification, right?
And a lot of people get the job and then they'll come back and gradually try to finish it.
What's that?
Not that FCC.
This FCC. Camp. Yeah, well, I mean, of course.
Not the Federal Communications
Just in case
Commission.
we was thinking like,
do
FCC,
they certify people?
What?
Yeah. When were you FCC certified?
Well, this is audio and this is the airwaves, the internet airwaves.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but still, I mean, 40,000 people, that is, to me, a huge amount. I mean, what does that feel like? Do you feel those numbers, or do they get so big at a certain point that it's kind of like another drop in the bucket? I mean, some numbers are hard to actually, like, I don't know, like, reify in your mind.
Well, I'm, extremely blessed, and I just feel incredibly grateful that there are so many people out there who bother, emailing me or tweeting at me or sharing these stories of their transitions from, working in accounting, being a trucker, working in manufacturing, all these different fields that they've gone from to doing software development. And so
that's interesting. It
contextualizes those numbers. When you're getting practically every day, I get an email from somebody saying, hey, I just was able to do this, thanks again. And then I'm able to follow up and say, like, oh yeah, can you tell me a little bit more about how you made this transition, or can you post it on the forum? Because a whole lot of people are in the process of trying to make this transition.
Yeah.
And so the number isn't abstract. I mean, it's abstract that it's that large, but I have so many concrete examples of that every day that drive home to me. And so for me, it's a dream come true. I never would have imagined that we would have anywhere near the scale of people being able to accomplish new things and, provide for their families in new ways and actualize themselves and be creative in new ways. So yeah, it's just been a huge honor and a huge blessing.
So one of the challenges that we've seen people facing coming out of non-traditional education backgrounds, such as I have a freeCodeCamp certification or some sort of other boot camp, or I'm self-taught, is that hiring process is difficult for them for lots of reasons. One of the reasons is that companies and organizations aren't always on board with hiring. I mean, more people are looking for senior developers than junior developers, and people who going through freeCodeCamp, sounds like they're having success getting hired. Do you help them on that side of things? Or is there like a community support? I'm wondering, like, if there's like tips and tricks, or how are people having that level of success of like, yeah, I got through the program and I got a job, because like you said, the job is what most of us are after. And so I'm just curious if there's like, if the community helps on the job side, or if it's just like once you're through the program, you just are competent enough to get yourself a job.
Yeah, it's a great question. We've kind of made a neutrality setup where we don't specifically guide people to specific companies. We built out a job board, and we were going to have it to where people could apply for jobs directly through freeCodeCamp. But we just thought about, like, if somebody has a negative experience, or if there are people out there who are, you read about a lot of these Silicon Valley companies that basically just pretend that they've got all this VC funding and things like that. And then the funding never materializes. And these people have moved to this expensive city and basically get stiffed on their paycheck. We didn't want to be associated with any sort of like project like that. So we just decided, we're going to leave the job board stuff and the recruitment stuff to the experts. And we're just going to focus on training people. Now, we do have interview preparation section that has hundreds of additional algorithm challenges. We've updated a lot of the Project Euler problems, Rosetta Code problems, and made them interactive with like tests that you can run right in the browser instead of having to, the old interface for Project Euler it's like a 20-year-old website. But it's just like you enter a number and it tells you whether you're right or wrong. It doesn't give you any more feedback than that, and it just takes a long time to enter it. So rather than having to do all that coding locally and then go and type a number into a web form and see if you're right, We just modernized it and made it an interactive experience. But so we've got lots of interview preparation stuff. We've also got, at this point, probably hundreds of I got a job type posts on the forum. And we've got lots of articles from people who transitioned successfully from other fields into tech, who successfully got jobs at Amazon or Google or other places like that, telling how they went through that process. Like, especially the thing that people underestimate the most is just the sheer numbers game that the modern developer job application process constitutes. It is quite often for like somebody who's finished freeCodeCamp or somebody who's gone to a boot camp to have to apply to hundreds of jobs. And then they'll start to get interviews and then they'll start to get offers. But we just try to instill in people the notion that this is hard. This is not easy. Anybody who tells you it's easy to go out and get a developer job, they're probably trying to sell you something because it's not easy.
That's right.
So we have all these resources and we have a supportive community who's there to share in your accomplishments, and you can just read lots of anecdotes that realize the statistics that we all know, that there are a tremendous number of developer jobs at all different levels. Certainly there are a lot of middle tier and senior jobs, and the senior ones are the ones where the recruiters most actively go out and aggressively try to recruit people. But there are definitely tons of small, medium level businesses that just need somebody, the church or the local food bank or the other organizations that want to have a nice website or just need somebody to help set up like a Facebook group or configure like a Wix website or something like that.
From your vantage point, can you see trends there in terms of it getting, by no means is it easy, but is it trending up in terms of those entry-level opportunities in your opinion, or has it just kind of been like a steady churn? Obviously, this would be from your vantage point, not like it's like based on numbers, but.
So I could look at the numbers, and we do have quite a bit of data that we've made public. For the last 3 years, we didn't do it this year just because we'd already done it so many times and there was already so much data. It's a lot of work. We did what's called the New Coder Survey, and it shows like how many, it asks about 50 questions. We had like 30,000 respondents. So it's a really huge data set.
Yeah.
Significant from a statistical standpoint. And if you dig into that, you can see like how many months of experience people had before they, started applying for jobs, or how long they've been working in for jobs. And you can sort of play with the numbers and figure that out. I don't have like a really well-informed answer on that. A lot of what I hear is just at the street level, people like saying that they got a job, or people saying they haven't gotten a job yet. And reality is messy, and every employer is different. Every country is different too. European, and I say European, that's really like a collection of a whole bunch of city-states, right? And then, you go to India, you go to China, you go to all these other countries where freeCodeCamp is really big, and the market's completely different. I've been to startups in like Shanghai, where I walk in the room and half the people working in the developer bullpen are freeCodeCamp grads.
Wow.
Right. So there are definitely jobs out there for people. It's just a question of what those jobs look like and how many applications you have to make and how many people are competing for those same jobs. I will say this though, getting a job, I think a lot of people think it's all about your skills, but it's really about three things in my opinion. It's about your skills, it's about your reputation, and it's about your network, whom you know. If you know the right people, you can get in even with subpar skills, subpar reputation. If you have a great reputation, you may not be the best developer, but people know who you are from your blog posts or from your YouTube channel, from your podcast, or just from your open source projects that you've contributed to.
Everyone wants to de-risk a choice, right? And the way you de-risk a choice is by some sort of assurance or certainty, right? And so if you have a decent reputation, you can kind of bet that you're a decent person.
Yeah. De-risking is exactly what I think employers are trying to do. They're just trying not to make the catastrophic choice that results in them having to terminate somebody, pay a whole bunch of severance, and then go through the entire job
over again.
Yeah. And it's costly.
It's funny that who you know comes so... It makes sense, but we try to be in a world where it's not about who you know, because it almost seems unfair,
And yet it totally still is the facts of life.
Right. That's what I mean. Like, so if you don't know the right kind of people, you can't build your reputation properly, or at least maybe add to an area where you have less of a reputation. You have somebody vouching for you, for lack of better terms. If you have a network, it's a network of people to some degree associating with you. They're therefore kind of adding to your reputation, that you're trustworthy, that you're somebody worth betting on or taking a risk on.
Yeah. And this is why like the local markets are so important. Like people focus so much on Silicon Valley and like the hyper competitive, like trying to get a job offer from Google or Facebook or Amazon. But if you go to a lot of communities, like we're here in Houston, right? And I live in the Dallas metropolitan area, and Jerod lives up in Omaha. Like these are all completely different tech ecosystems with different employers, different hiring cultures, different circles of people that meet together for tech talks and events, and different professional groups. I mean, like if you learn your local meta, and if you're content to stay in the city you are in currently, there won't necessarily be like a clear roadmap for you to get to that job. But if you pound the pavement and if you get to meet people, I think that things will work out for you, because you're already doing a lot more work than most of the job applicants do.
Plus, like you said, many companies that aren't traditional software companies need software people. And so as you know, the old saying goes, software's eating the world. Every company is becoming a software company. Well, there's a lot more competition to work at the software company, right? They need developers because they develop software for a living. But there's a lot of companies that just need like one or two people, and maybe their bar is a little bit lower. The competition is going to be less. Maybe you have a friend who works there. Like there's just lots of those what you might consider non-traditional software opportunities, where it's like, well, maybe they're not a software company, but they have software needs, and I bet you can pitch in there maybe even more so than you could at the place that has 100 developers already.
Yeah. If getting a developer job is hard, does that mean that it's got something broken in the system? And if you say yes, what is that? And if no, then move on. So if it's hard to get a job that way, it's somewhat of an indicator that there's a broken system.
Yeah, I mean,
or there's broken processes. Something's broken. What makes it so difficult, aside from reputation, network, skill?
It's hard here in the U.S. Again, I have lots of friends in China and India and places like that where I think it's comparatively easy. Not in every city in those countries, but in a lot of markets, it's just much easier to go out and get a job. In the U.S., we have like a combination of like benefits and like the legal framework, and all these things make hiring and firing very difficult. So because it's difficult to bring it's costly to make a mistake.
Yeah.
Really. So that makes employers really risk averse, even in a field where there's so much demand. And also employers to some extent are operating under pattern recognition. So they're like, oh, this person has worked at this company, right? That's like the biggest indicator of your likelihood of success. Yeah. Whom have you worked for? And do they have similarly stringent hiring requirements? So if you've worked at Google, there's a very good chance that you're going to be a good employee at, XYZ Corp as well. So, and these are things that I think that there's a great, she writes a lot of articles for freeCodeCamp's publication as well. Aileen Lerner, she does interviewing.io, and she's written a ton of articles that are much more data driven on this. But I wouldn't say hiring is broken. That's kind of a strong word, but I would say there are very clear ways in which things can be improved without having to completely overhaul, the way that we handle labor in the United States, for example. Just pair programming or doing more take-home assignments rather than doing whiteboard challenges would be one, I think, fairly obvious improvement, because that is heavily biased toward recent college graduates who just spent a whole bunch of time but basically going ad nauseum through algorithms for like tests and stuff like that. It doesn't work as well when you're hiring somebody who's been out of the job market for a while, if they just had a kid, or somebody who has just been working for a long time but hasn't interviewed for jobs recently.
Your mission isn't to get people hired, it's to educate. Would you say that? Would you agree with that? Or is it kind of both sides?
So our official,
because you said you don't really help place, so you're not, it's sort of part of, it's implied by your efforts.
So our official mission is just to help as many people as possible learn to code. Yeah. I think that's written at the bottom of every single page in our footer. That's our official NGO's mission.
Yeah.
That said, virtually everybody who uses FreeCodeCamp dreams of one day becoming more technical. Now, whether that's actually being a software engineer, or just, being a designer who can code, or a marketer who can code, or somebody who wants to build like a cool interface for their drone that they're flying around as a hobby.
Yeah.
Somebody who wants to build an Alexa app just to impress their kids. There are so many different use cases for programming knowledge, but it's all a net positive. I like to say that, back in the 1600s, you didn't need to be able to read to go out and work, right? But the people who did sit down and take the time to learn to read were not infinitely, but they were dramatically better off as a result. Same thing in the 1920s. If you learned how to drive a car, suddenly you had all these new opportunities open to you. And more recently, like the 1990s, people really learned how to use spreadsheets. They learned how to use word processors. They learned how to use like these slide-based tools like PowerPoint. And that opened up so many opportunities for people. So yeah, you can get by without it. You could be, a congressperson in 2019 who doesn't know how to type and just relies on a secretary to do the typing for them, right? But real life, like, you are better off just gathering those additional skills. And I think that soon people will awaken to the fact that being able to code is very helpful, and it does give you a whole lot of additional options.
So figuring out the financials is one aspect of sustainability. Another aspect is making it so that Quincy doesn't have to do all the work. And surely you have a team at this point and lots of people contributing. So like to hear the different roles, who's involved, and then as a follow-up to that, how you inspired them to get involved in FreeCodeCamp's mission.
Absolutely, yeah. So FreeCodeCamp, currently we have a lot of active contributors, and I'm extremely grateful for all of them. And we're getting ready to, maybe by the time this episode goes live, we'll have our top contributors for 2019. We've got some really nice backpacks that we're going to ship to them to recognize their efforts, to say 2019 top contributor. It's got the FreeCodeCamp logo. And these are the same backpacks that we sold a few months ago. We're actually running a second run of those too, since we're going to be printing some these top contributor ones. But there are 7 people who work for FreeCodeCamp full time, including myself. And they are all generalists in the sense that they all wear a lot of hats. Everybody comes up through FreeCodeCamp as contributors after a few years of contributing. If they seem to be particularly capable or particularly passionate, and we have the resources, then we will bring them on. And so currently the team is again, me doing just everything. Like, I do support, and I also do, I'm overseeing a couple different projects within. Then we have Bo Carnes, who is running the FreeCodeCamp YouTube channel, which recently became, I think, the biggest programming channel on YouTube. It's got 1.4 million subscribers now. There's a channel called The New Boston that hasn't been updated in like 4 or 5 years, and they have more subscribers than we do. But other than them, I think we're the biggest. So Bo runs that. He creates a lot of the videos. He does a lot of the editing for our contributors. And Bo also is working with a curriculum. So Bo worked as a teacher for, I think, 5 or 6 years prior to joining FreeCodeCamp, a public school teacher up in Michigan. We have Abigail Rennemeyer. She is based in Portland, and she worked as a archaeologist before. She has like a totally different background, but she had been editing thousands of articles for the FreeCodeCamp publication, and she kept doing it. And I was like, hey, you want to do this full time? So she's been doing that. She also runs the podcast. So if you've listened to the FreeCodeCamp podcast, there's a good chance you've heard her interviewing people. And then we have Ahmed Abdul Sahab. He's in Turkey. He recently immigrated to Turkey. And he is doing some exciting things over there. He does a lot of the design. Like when we overhauled FreeCodeCamp's visual design, he did a lot of that work. And he also does a lot of just like the in and out code maintenance. Then we have Mukesh Mohapatra, who is in Bangalore, and he does pretty much everything regarding the core code base and like all the servers. And he's the person we call if something catastrophic happens. And then we have Christopher Koishigawa, who's in South Korea, and he was working as a teacher for the last 6 years and started contributing a whole lot to our interview prep section. And so we brought him on. So he and Bo are working together on the updated curriculum, which I can talk about in a minute. And then we also have Mia Liu, who is based in Hangzhou in China, and she's running the freeCodeCamp China team. And we basically have like a completely parallel organization in China. And we've got Chinese language forum, Chinese language publication, and Chinese language curriculum. And that's, hundreds of thousands of people using that. So I think I got everybody.
It is hard to always remember everybody on the spot.
Yeah.
As we experienced recently as well. So that's amazing. You have a parallel organization in China. Just curious in terms of the freeCodeCamp alum or even just the users. I mean, your team is spread abroad. And so where's your biggest audience? Like, do you have the foothold in
India?
Is it India?
India and the United States are like neck and neck. Sometimes there are more people in India. Sometimes there are more people in the U.S. And then Nigeria's third, and China. And then
is that based on just visits, or how do you
use?
Yeah.
Logged in use?
Yeah, like time on site.
Yeah.
Right.
Gotcha.
Okay. So you have Chinese translation. Do you have translation into other languages as well, or just the two?
Yeah, that's a great question. What we're trying to do is just really make sure that we have everything rock solid in Chinese. And Chinese is bigger than most of the other world languages combined. It's second only to English. If you look at like Wikipedia usage, and this is what we used for our metrics, like to plan internationalization, we looked at how Wikipedia was being used, and we looked at like the world language usage for different translations of Wikipedia. And then we looked at like the total number of speakers of those languages that were using the internet actively. China is just exploding in terms of people adopting technology, and they're very enthusiastic about it. And a lot of them are getting great jobs, and there's a lot of money going into just a lot of different aspects of like artificial intelligence, like machine learning, essentially.
Yeah.
The real machine learning, and also the ifs and then statements and stuff like that. And then also there is a whole lot of expertise in China. India, a lot of the great Indian engineers stay here, and a lot of the Chinese engineers go back to China and create companies. So, I'm trying to think of some names of famous engineers who've left like Google or have left like teaching at Stanford, who've gone back to China. But there are a lot of really promising companies over there. So we wanted to do China first. I personally, maybe I'm a little bit biased because I lived in China for like 5 years. My wife's Chinese, and I'm just very optimistic about the future of China. Over the course of the past 30 years, they've taken hundreds of millions of people from subsistence agriculture, and they've transformed into a manufacturing center of the world, and now they're transforming into much more services and creative-based economy. And learning to code is going to be a big part of that.
For sure.
Can you speak to the need for native language curriculum? Like specifically with what I've heard, at least with China, is that there's this desire, obviously, a massive amount of people there, but most of the documentation, a lot of the books tend to be, or are more likely to be, in English. Can you speak to the need for native language curriculum?
Yeah, well, it's always easiest to learn in your native language. It's just one less thing you need to worry about. A lot of people, more than 1 billion, have Chinese as their main language.
More than 1 billion?
Yeah. I mean, if you include like written Chinese, like there are a lot of spoken dialect variations.
How many on Earth? 6.5, 7 billion people?
No, you're behind. It's like 7.5 or 8 at this
almost,
point.
Yeah, it'll be 8 in like 10 or 15 years.
It's been a while since I've been to the stats machine here. Okay. But the point is that that's quite a lot of people. I mean, more than 1 billion people.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's a massive amount of people.
That's like, I was going to say 1/2 Facebook, but I can't remember Facebook's numbers
Facebook, I think, is 2.5 billion.
Yeah, it's not even.
That's half
all
Facebook.
right,
There you
take it.
go.
Gosh, that's crazy.
That
number.
is not.
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense too. It's interesting too to hear your insights on the choice to use a massive global site like Wikipedia as an example to say,
That's smart.
you know, why did you choose? What did you choose first? Under what circumstances? Because in a lot of ways, what you're doing is creating a Wikipedia, for lack of better terms, for software developers, right? Curriculum is very much like that.
Wikipedia has been a huge influence on us. And of course, Wikipedia is mostly open source as well. And they're also a nonprofit. So
Right.
in many ways, if Wikipedia hadn't proved out the concept that you could have a donor-supported commons of learning material, in their case, more encyclopedic, in our case, more procedural, skill-focused learning, you know, FreeCodeCamp probably we wouldn't have attempted it because we needed that proof of concept. I'm not the kind of person who's going to throw their entire livelihood behind like a totally wild guess. But I sensed, I guess correctly in retrospect, that there would be demand there and that people who were graduating from FreeCodeCamp and going out and getting these great jobs would turn around and donate back to the organization, and it would be sustainable.
Do you see somebody utilizing FreeCodeCamp and maybe a boot camp as well, or some sort of intensive? Is there a scenario where it's only FreeCodeCamp? I know you're not trying to do that because you're very community minded and oriented, but is the intention to be FreeCodeCamp alone, or is it sort of like a companion to other learning opportunities?
So I've always viewed FreeCodeCamp as a core curriculum, if you will. And a lot of coding boot camps do use FreeCodeCamp as either part of their curriculum or they'll use it as their pre-course work. And we have a really good relationship with a lot of coding boot camps. And I'm very excited about the future of coding boot camps. Really anything that can drive down the cost of adult education. Because universities are...
The hardest part about that too is curriculum development.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you have to start from scratch every time you want to start up another boot camp opportunity in your neck of the woods, whether it's here in the States or elsewhere abroad, you know, if you can shrink that time from, you know, desire to teach to teaching, it's a leg up on opportunity.
I'd agree. It's the hardest part, but it's not the most important part. The most important part is the interpersonal relationships that, you know, a teacher or professor has with their students, and that students have with one another, and you know, the counselors that help you prepare for the job search, and all the other things that a university or a coding boot camp or any sort of adult education program can add, like the value added. The curriculum itself, really, if you think about it, very few people actually design curriculum in the sense that most universities have textbooks.
Yeah.
Right. And like everybody, like you go to Econ 101 and everybody has, you know, the same textbook regardless of which university you're studying at for the most part.
Gotcha.
So yeah, FreeCodeCamp can be a free interactive textbook that these organizations can use. And of course it can be used on its own, just like I could go to a library and crack open a textbook and learn economics, or I can learn, you know, how to program in C just from a textbook or from some sort of static resource. The main advantage with FreeCodeCamp, of course, is it's experiential, it's project focused, and things stick a lot better when you're actually building.
How do you keep it fresh? How do you keep it relevant, current? And maybe the naysayers saying, "Oh, your curriculum is not current enough, or it is not idiomatic enough."
Yeah.
And how do you push back the haters, basically?
Well, we just focus on fundamentals. We're not going to be covering bleeding edge tools for the most part. Like, I believe that everybody needs to just get a really strong foundation first. And most of what constitutes foundational knowledge as a developer is stuff that was figured out in like the 60s and 70s. And in the case of mathematics, sometimes hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, right? So what we're teaching is just the most ubiquitous tools that are the most generally applicable. I think Node.js is, to a large extent, won kind of the web server war, if you will. And JavaScript is useful for pretty much any kind of web development. We're getting ready to introduce Python as well as a core part of the curriculum. So currently it's 6 certifications. Each certification requires you to build 5 projects and get all their tests passing. So we're adding 4 additional Python-focused certifications. So right now, our certification, just for people who aren't aware, front end specific, we have the responsive web design. We have JavaScript algorithms and data structures. Then we have front-end libraries, data visualization with like D3JS primarily. And then we have the full stack focused ones, which are APIs and microservices and information security and quality assurance. So we're going to add 4 additional Python ones that will be either at the end of that or we'll kind of break up those, but we're adding scientific computing with Python. We're adding data analysis. We're adding information security with Python, and we are adding machine learning using TensorFlow, Keras, and potentially scikit-learn. So we're adding lots of tools, but these are not tools that are like groundbreakingly new. These are things that academics and practitioners in the field have been using for years.
What about things like the small things like I think of the JavaScript syntax and the updates to the language. I mean, the nice thing about web development is mostly additive, like new technologies add on top of HTML and on top of CSS. With trends in JavaScript, I think the big change between callbacks to promises to async await, like those are things that do get outdated. Do you just like churn it out and keep it updated, or do you not fight those battles? What do you do there?
So we just update. Like if one thing, like for example, CSS variables, we're probably going to rip out our Sass section at this point because CSS is getting so many of the core features that like those preprocessors
offer.
That,
Adam, they're taking Sass out.
Yeah, it's about time. I told you. No one want this whole little show. Never mind.
Yeah, and then like we still have a Bootstrap section, but probably just going to teach Flexbox and Grid and stuff like that. So we do go through an update, and like you just asked, specifically as new features are added to ES6 or ES 2019 or whatever they're calling it this year.
Right.
We'll just go and update the individual lessons, and we kind of update them in situ and add additional lessons if necessary. The entire curriculum is about to become completely project-oriented. This is something we started at the beginning of the year. We're rewriting our lessons to all be building projects. So instead of learn JavaScript, and here are 200 JavaScript lessons that are tangentially related, go through them, it's learn JavaScript by building a role-playing game.
Yeah.
Nice.
And so you'll build like a role-playing game, you'll learn basic JavaScript from that. You'll learn typography from building a USDA nutrition label. You'll learn all these different things through projects, and currently the curriculum is like 30 certification projects and a whole bunch of lessons. Soon it'll be 30 certification projects and also a whole bunch of practice projects, like 30 or 40 practice projects. So those will all be interactive with tests the entire time, and you'll build the projects one line at a time, one passing test at a time.
It's so much easier to learn when you have some sort of like concrete expectation or visual in mind, like giving somebody a goal and not just abstract thoughts of like, oh, here's, as you said, 200 different tangential lessons on JavaScript. It's more like, here's what we're learning in order to build something like this that you've seen in the real world. You may have even used in the real world, nutrition labels, for example. What was that one for? That was tables?
Learning typography.
Typography, yeah.
Like visual hierarchy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so we've got, this is all, of course, open source. It's all on GitHub. So if you want to see exactly how our curriculum's coming along, you can check it out. And we're going to keep plugging away at it. Like I said, Christopher Koishigawa and Bo Carnes are working on this basically full time, doing instructional design. They're both trained classroom teachers who've also learned web development on their own through freeCodeCamp over the years and through other resources. So should be really, really solid. And even if it's not totally solid when it launches, that's the great thing about open source. It'll gradually accrue a whole bunch of improvements, and eventually it will be great.
Yeah. Eventually great. It's like eventual consistency, only it's eventual greatness. So in addition to the refresh of the curriculum, you also launched a brand new refresh to the learning platform. You're now buzzword compliant because you're on the Jamstack.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about some of the new infra and the code and what you're doing there?
Yeah, absolutely. So Jamstack, JavaScript, APIs, and markup is what Jamstack stands for. My friend Matt Billman over at Netlify coined that term in a bar at some point. I don't remember the exact story, but he's been a big proponent of just like the security and the performance boost that you can get from just, doing everything at build time and then just serving like the static files essentially.
Right.
So now FreeCodeCamp, if you go to freeCodeCamp.org and you go into the Learn app, pretty much everything is prepackaged and you get the entire application. It just loads and it'll work offline. It won't work offline perfectly right now, but we're working on getting it to be like a offline first app. So there are a lot of advantages, and a lot of those advantages have to do with the fact that we don't have to. Sorry, that little thing threw me off.
Text message.
Okay. Yeah. A lot of those advantages just have to do with the fact that we don't have to spend as much money on servers.
Yeah.
We can cache everything.
Has that been like a substantial difference for
we
you?
spend like, we spend like $5,000 a month on servers.
What do you spend now that you're on Jam?
I think we're spending like $4,000, but we're still doing a lot of the optimizations. I mean, it will
a month.
Gradually it'll reduce.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Eventual greatness.
Eventual greatness. Curious why, if you have such a massive global audience, why, and this is just the partnership personality in me comes out as like why you wouldn't reach out to someone in that business to establish some sort of partnership and make that 0 or very low.
If anybody is listening who's like in a position to grant a whole lot of credits or do something,
you'll take them.
Yeah, we'll take them. We use all that we can get from like Amazon, Azure, Google Cloud. Like we use all the credits we can get. we just need a lot.
Are you picky on platform?
Are you picky?
As long as it's reliable. So
okay.
Azure is where a lot of our stuff is hosted. DigitalOcean is where some of it's hosted. We have to be very mindful about what services we locate where, like how critical they are. So far, Azure, in my experience, has been incredibly reliable. And AWS is really reliable too. But we decided to like locate most of our database and our servers in Azure because they gave the most generous credits, candidly. They give every nonprofit like $3,500, $4,000 a year in credits. And that's a big head start. And so we locate everything in the same data center. It reduces latency. So if we had like a significant offer of credits, we might be able to relocate the entire stack for like Learn over to a different place. But we wouldn't want to do it piecemeal just because of the introduction of latency and additional security risks and stuff like that.
But either way, with the new stack, you've definitely been able to shrink said budget. So
yeah, and this is just day one. Like this is the very beginning.
Is there
of
a
the
stack
process.
though? I mean, isn't that the point of Jamstack? Is you do it when you build and then? Well, you said most of your stack is.
We still have like servers that like.
Are these like things
API.
that are like APIs?
Yeah,
yeah.
So whenever you complete a lesson, for example, it writes back, and if it can't establish connection with server, it just stores in like local memory or I think local storage is what we use, and then when it reestablishes connection, then it pushes. So we're building out all that kind of redundancy and turgidness.
Right. Very cool. So any drawbacks on the Jamstack so far? Like things that you're like, oh, we didn't see this one coming.
Cache invalidation is always challenging. Like you push a bunch of changes and they're cached on like Cloudflare or Netlify, CDN or something, and you just have to wait till it propagates or, hey, try refreshing. And we're working on figuring out a way to do that so we don't have to tell people, try doing a hard refresh.
That's every web developer's least favorite phrase is try refreshing, because we hate saying that. It's like
have you turn it off and on again?
Right. It's kind of like I kind of failed at the cache invalidation part. Hard refresh. And you have to go teach people how to hard refresh versus regular refresh.
Yeah.
I've been there.
Yeah.
I've done that.
So that's been the biggest drawback. But I mean, on a whole, and then like I think Netlify was like under like a DDoS attack the other day, and like we had some like uptime issues with that. But again, it's like they're doing the best they can. They're a pretty small organization compared to like the AWSs of the world. We just want to be there to support them, and we're just grateful that like Netlify, Discourse, a whole lot of other organizations have given us in-kind sponsorship in the sense they're not giving us money, but they are giving us like servers and services. That makes a big difference.
Yeah.
So the third pillar of what you're up to, we've talked about the learning platform, the forums we touched on at the very beginning of the conversation. We haven't talked much about the publication.
Yeah, that's a big part of FreeCodeCamp is we have freeCodeCamp.org/news, and we have hundreds of authors who are publishing articles there every week. not like active. We don't get hundreds of articles every week. We're going for quality over quantity. It's not an open publishing platform where you can just like sign in and start publishing. With the publication, you have to apply, and we're really selective. I think like we had 5% selectivity. So most people, they'll submit a whole bunch of writing samples. We'll force them to read our style guide and all that stuff, make them jump through all the hoops. If they want it badly enough, then we'll give them a conditional account, like a contributor account, and then they can write drafts, and we can look at those. And if the moment we see one of the drafts that we're like, yeah, this is ready to go, this is solid, we can do a little bit of editing, publish it, and then we give them full access to our Google Analytics so they can see exactly who's reading their articles, like basically everything Google Analytics tracks, and we've got a bunch of additional custom filters and stuff. Make it really simple for them. That's the only tracking we use, by the way. We use Google Analytics because at this point, it's the only, like server-side analytics are great, but you just don't have enough information for the authors to be able to understand their readership.
This process of collaboration, or lack thereof, if there isn't any, on the edit process, how do you handle that? Do you have sort of baked in processes where you're giving them feedback and suggesting edits, or do you make the edits and say, this is how it is? How's that relationship?
Yeah, we make the edits for them, and then we tell them what edits we made generally. If usually the edits are seemingly unimportant, but actually really important. Like the headline is by far the most important thing, to the point that I'm practically at the point where I was just like, I'm just going to write the headlines for you, because like that's all 90% of people see, especially in the age of like Apple News and Reddit and all these aggregators. People just scroll through headlines, and that's their news. Like very few people actually click through.
Do you actually say anything like a headline is a suggestion from them, and it is, let's say, for lack of better terms, it's in your hands at the end? Like what they write may actually become the headline, but it's actually just a suggestion.
Yeah,
and
we're clear that like essentially they're writing, and to save a whole bunch of back and forth, a bunch of communication overhead that slows things down, we just apply the edits ourselves.
Yeah.
And people understand that. They appreciate it because they understand that we care a lot about quality, and we want to get their article read by as many people as possible. The way we do that, of course, is after they publish it, we publicize it through our Twitter account, which I don't know how many followers it has. Is a lot. Is it like it has a high level of engagement? Let's say that. Like generally, when we tweet something, it gets retweeted like 10 to sometimes 100 times. And we also have a huge LinkedIn alumni network, and we get like 2 million impressions a month just off of LinkedIn, posting things on LinkedIn. So, and then of course I have my email blast that I send out, and I've got like a mailing list of like 2.5 million people. So a lot of people click through and read those articles that I choose for the weekly email blast. So
it's worth it.
We're giving them a megaphone to reach a whole lot of people and to really raise their profile in the developer community. And they take that opportunity seriously.
Yeah. What kind of pieces are you looking for? Because I remember in your post you mentioned like journalistic kind of stuff eventually, or I don't know.
Eventually, we'd like to have explanatory journalism where we take like net neutrality. For example, I wrote maybe like 10,000 words about net neutrality, and it put everything in context right during the peak of like people asking about net neutrality and curious about it. And it put it in a historic context with all the other mediums that preceded it, the other media that preceded it, like radio, cable, stuff like that. And so that would be kind of like the archetypal, like if I was going to lead by example, I'd say we should be writing in-depth articles like this. And there are plenty of other publications that write real, like New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. A lot of them will just have really in-depth articles that put things in a historical context. It's not just like this happened and this happened and this happened. It's like this happened and here's why that's significant from a historical perspective, or here's what that means. So explanatory technology journalism. Explanatory technology journalism, that's kind of our aspiring goal. One of our goals is to get people to actually come to freeCodeCamp.org every day and have something new and exciting that they can learn. Right now, people just blow through the curriculum and they get a job and they're like, awesome. Oh, FreeCodeCamp, I used that back in 2017. I hear that all the time. And I'm like, we're still doing a lot of exciting stuff.
We're still here. I was going to ask you about that because it's one thing to, if your mission is to educate as a primary mission, and you mentioned the 3 pillars, it's going to be very difficult to keep a captive audience because of what you just said. So it's very easy for people to be transient, given that their goals and their means have been covered and they're gone.
Yeah.
So, it makes sense. I almost want to ask you, like, you got curriculum, you got the forum, and then you got publication. How much thought did you put into that? Because it's pretty smart, because you're answering my question without even answering it by this publication being there and freeCodeCamp News being there, because you're bringing them back. Whereas before they didn't have a reason to come back, and now they do, and you're sort of keeping them captive when before they were just, they've learned, they've gotten their job, they've moved on, and they've said, hey, I learned about it back in, and that's it now.
Yeah. And there's always more stuff to learn, right? Like, I learned a lot about quantum computing in the past few weeks. I learned a lot about, micron length semiconductor manufacturing and stuff like that, right? So there's always new stuff that's coming out. I mean, technology by definition is new, so there's always new stuff. And just being able to explain how, you orchestrate with Kubernetes, or how a Docker container works. What's the difference between a Docker image and a Docker container, right? Or a Docker instance. I can't even remember all the different terms associated with Docker.
You need an article.
Do you have, you mentioned a freeCodeCamp mission, but it seems like the roles of these pillars are distinct. So do they have their own agenda that feeds into a sort of main or corporate agenda?
Yeah, like why these three?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we are strong believers in content. I think that one of the biggest tragedies is that so much of the rewards of the web have been accrued by platforms that are basically just aggregating other people's content. If you look at like Facebook and Reddit and all these companies, they're benefiting from providing the basic infrastructure. You could argue that, Medium fits that boat, Quora. They just create the software. Everybody else comes and adds the content, and people don't care about the infrastructure that much. They really are there for the content, right?
Yeah.
It'd be like you saying like Netflix should accrue 100% of the value because they created such a great streaming platform, and that like the Hollywood movie companies shouldn't get anything because, hey, they just created the content. Content's free, right? Or cheap. But content is not a commodity. Really good content is incredibly valuable. And if you look, like, there's The Information, for example. It's like this news publication that charges like hundreds of dollars a year to get a subscription. The Economist historically has always charged like $150, $200 a year for a subscription. And I think we're going to see more and more of these publications that are like, this is really high quality, so we're not going to give it away for free. At the same time, there are publications that do give it away for free, like ProPublica and The Guardian and places like that. And that's because they're fully donor supported. They can do that. And freeCodeCamp, of course, being fully donor supported by small individual donors. We're a grassroots organization. We can do that. We can make everything free, and we can provide tons of content from our community and from ourselves, like paid staffers like me who are writing articles and things like that.
Yeah. So let's talk about donations real quick, and then we'll switch gears because I do want to talk about Meetup. You mentioned platforms. There's one. So $5 a month. Let's just say I go and sign up for recurring. I'm in. I like your mission. I got the cash. I'm going to give you $5 a month. Where does that money go?
Yeah, great question. So first, we've got 7 people. Okay, first let me talk big numbers so everybody understands. freeCodeCamp's 2019 budget was $373,000. That may sound like a lot of money, but I know developers in Silicon Valley who personally make more money than that a year.
Sure.
That is maybe payroll for like 3 or 4 people, right? And we're figuring out a way to like stretch it across 7 people, and we're also paying tens of thousands of dollars a year in servers. So the answer is like 100% of that gets consumed by what is traditionally called programs. When you analyze a nonprofit, there's there's fundraising, there's administration, and there's programs. And we don't really have administration. We don't do fundraising. We have Quincy Larson saying, "Please donate to our nonprofit, please, sir."
Right.
We don't have a PR firm. We don't have a marketing department. You could argue that we could do better and we could raise more money, but that introduced a lot of complexity to the organization.
It does.
And right now, everybody who works at freeCodeCamp came up through freeCodeCamp.
Right.
We never interviewed anybody.
Yeah, I get it. And I would say, like, I know a lot of nonprofits that do the fundraising side. Yeah. And of course, it's akin to like a bootstrapped company getting VC funding. I mean, there's like some analogs there, but it's different. But you could at least, but the hardest way is the individual recurring donations versus having a person on staff, maybe it's you or maybe it's somebody who's really good at going around to the big donors,
Yeah,
to the foundations. Maybe that's the reason why.
Part of it
was
is
his response?
My point is, you could get like a $1 million grant.
maybe, yeah, but we'd be beholden to those organizations, and also like that would kind of spoil us.
That's why
by going out and fighting in the field to like earn people's donations. Regular people who are just working day jobs, have kids, feed and paying mortgages, but they're like, hey, yeah, I can spare $5 for freeCodeCamp a month, or yeah, it's the end of the year and I can just give them $1,000 or $10,000.
What about those companies though that are reaping the benefits of your work?
That's fine. It's like a positive externality for them, right? It's consumer surplus for them.
But there's uncaptured opportunity there.
I mean, you could argue the same thing with Wikipedia. I mean, how much value do you think Wikipedia has bestowed upon the world by making it to where I can get good factual information within seconds from a relatively objective arbiter of truth? Yeah, there's a whole lot of value that is not captured, but that's kind of the point.
Yeah, but then they also have to put Jimmy Whale's face on Wikipedia for 1 month every year and bug the dog do out of their users when they could just do these other things such as some tasteful ads. I know you've...
No, I have no problem with advertising.
Right.
I think it's a great model, especially for podcasts. But also, like if you don't have the invasive ad networks and stuff, I think ads can
ethical
be great.
advertising could be a
ethical.
I know you've decided to go pretty much ad free, like across the board. I think it's an admirable decision. That being said, we're back. I cut you off on the donations thing. Like you pretty much that whole $5 is going right towards programs.
Yes.
And there's no fluff. There's nothing else. It's all right there.
We're extremely lean. We're living lean. I mean, we have in-depth discussions about whether to like pay for like a $20 a month service because it's like, oh,
really?
Yeah. I mean, we just want to operate really efficiently. Like a lot of my heroes, like. Sam Walton, for example, kind of Walmart on this notion of thrift. And you can argue that like Walmart has not been the best employer, the best patron of different communities that it's been in. But it's hard to argue that it hasn't been good for the end consumer because they've managed to drive down the prices of so many things.
Absolutely.
And save people an incredible amount of money, like especially families. These are corporations that could probably make a lot more money. But they're choosing to kind of be broader and more resilient to changes in the economy and things like that.
It's a trade-off.
Yeah, it's a trade-off. But with FreeCodeCamp, we're never going to capture all the value. We don't even. If we can capture, like, just to give you an idea, less than 0.1%. Or I'm sorry, it's about 0.5% of our monthly active users donate.
Yeah.
So it's just a fraction. If I can get a little bit better at my pitching.
Right.
Well, you're going to my next question. And so let's talk about scale. What are the conversations you have with yourself or anyone else in the team about like, okay, when you said your budget was $375,000 a year or 378?
377.
Right.
This year. For this year.
This year.
373. Sorry. 373.
So does that equate to revenue? And I guess the second question might be, when you talk about growth of revenue or income dollars, however you describe it in nonprofit senses, what are the ways in which you make that number grow?
Yeah, so we just get more people using FreeCodeCamp. It's as simple as that. The more people that use FreeCodeCamp, a certain percentage of them will go out and get great jobs and turn around and donate. Like sometimes we hit, like a windfall. Like I was saying earlier, we had somebody who donated $10,000 earlier this month, Sean Wang. He went through FreeCodeCamp. He works at Netlify, and he had money at the end of the year, and he wanted to donate it to a high-impact charity. FreeCodeCamp, just to put our capital efficiency in perspective, we have delivered 1.1 billion minutes of instruction this year. That's the equivalent of 2,000 years of learning in 1 year. We've done that for $373,000. That's the equivalent of 50 hours of instruction for every dollar spent.
Now you're putting it in terms I like to hear.
So if you go to
that makes my $5 feel a lot bigger.
Yeah. So your $5 each month is essentially paying for an entire classroom of people to learn.
That's interesting. I like the fact too that I lost my thought. That I'll get it in just a second.
Well,
Yeah, I lost it.
I
It's
will-
gone.
It's all right. We've been talking
I'll
a
get it
while.
back in just a second.
Yeah. One thing that is important to note also is that these people are able to do it for free, and the scale that we're operating at, it's not only self-paced and free and fully interactive. It's just incredibly cheap. Like, to put that 50 hours per dollar in perspective, in the United States, the average cost of having a child in a public school is $10 per hour per child. So FreeCodeCamp is
Wow.
several orders of magnitude more efficient
yeah.
than and granted, they're trying to accomplish totally different things. We don't
Right.
have classrooms. We don't have a teacher with a student-teacher ratio of like 17 to 1 or whatever. We just do instructional design and people work through it at their own pace. But it's because of those concerted decisions that we're able to be dramatically more
Right.
efficient. These are all conscious decisions we made because our ultimate goal is scale. Our ultimate goal is helping as many people as possible for as little money as absolutely necessary.
Which brings me back to what I forgot. I like the fact that you're focused on those two metrics. You grow the number of FreeCodeCamp, I guess, interested people, users, however you want to describe it. And then that obviously impacts the ratio of donors. And you can sort of like grow that one to grow this one, or you can grow this one too. I mean, like, meaning, if you grew the amount from 5%.
0.5%. Is that what you said, is that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Half a
0.5%.
percent.
Geez, if you
Double that.
if you double to 1%,
Right.
I mean, so you can sort of focus on those two metrics: either grow the total captive audience,
Right.
or grow
Conversion.
the ratio of
Yeah.
donors. I like the simplicity of focusing on two things rather than so many other things
Yeah.
to grow, to scale.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I'm reluctant to bring in a fundraising expert or
Right.
To try to personally fly around and meet with the CEOs of all these different.
Because if you can get by
companies.
without it, it's obviously better than to not have to do that. And it seems like you're on that path. You have these two numbers. The higher leverage one is honestly the percentage.
Yeah.
But you seem to be pretty good at growing the top end funnel at this point.
Yeah.
All these people using it.
You've
Pretty
also
amazing.
been very patient.
So
Based on 4 years ago, we talked to you, and you're also, and I don't want to use this word too loosely, but you're not greedy, right? Like, there are some people that just, and maybe it's, I don't know really how you describe greed, where it's not egregious or so, like where it's
overly greedy.
yeah, like
You have the right
overly
level of greed.
right? You can have
Ambition.
capitalistic ambitions and not be greedy. You seem to have a patience that is uncanny
well,
for that.
I
Where it's not everybody has the kind of patience you have. Like, I don't. I couldn't do what you've done.
Yeah, well, I managed for-profit companies before I started FreeCodeCamp, like as a school director, essentially. Like, it was a private intensive English program, and I had to make sure that we had like a good EBITDA and all those metrics that matter. So, and I have kind of a traditional business background in addition to my education background, so I can understand the physics of business, so to speak. And that's really helpful because that gives me some perspective. And it's kind of like if you're a jazz musician, if you don't know how to play, you can just do chromatic scale, play whatever. It doesn't sound good. But if you do know how to play, you know exactly how to break the rules and how to bend the rules to make it sound really cool. So that's like, to some extent, the fact that I'm older, I'm going to turn 40 next year. That gives me a huge edge because I've got the life experience. I'd run a lot of organizations before FreeCodeCamp, so I knew like the people part of it and the budgeting part of it. So I guess in some respects, one of the reasons I'm more patient is I'm more confident in the state of the world and how things work and fit together.
Yeah.
And also, I had my wife who has the patience of Job, and she had a job with benefits and we had health insurance for our kid and for ourselves.
Yeah.
And so I didn't need to, run out and buy that Ferrari or whatever it is that, startup people do when they exit. Like, FreeCodeCamp will hopefully go on forever, and hopefully at least for the rest of my life, which I'm hoping to live to be, 90, 100, like, hopefully I can continue to be involved in leading or helping somebody else lead the organization for the rest of my life. So everything is long term. This is not a problem that's going to magically solve itself. You look at how long it's taken to get people to, to even get literacy to the rate it is after 400 years, right? This is going to be an ongoing challenge to teach people about technology.
We probably have people coming into developer land at a faster rate than the birth rate at this point. Just a thought exercise. Think about which one's actually happening faster. So I think maybe we're converting more developers than we're birthing them at this point. So huge, massive forward-looking opportunity as well and impact. So let's do a hard cut to...
Can I ask one question before we do the hard cut?
Yes.
Real fast. I don't think it'll take you long to answer this one. It's probably really easy even for you. Have you gotten offers or people, venture capital, anybody that's come to you and said, Quincy, I will buy what you got. I will give, whatever it might be. Have you gotten some, how often do you get these things?
I'm not going to say the names, but we've had some big companies that have approached us for acqui-hire, I guess. Yeah. I don't know how it would work. I mean, this is before we got the tax exempt status. But once we got that, people just left us alone because you can, in theory, unwind an NGO. Like if somebody wanted to acquire the Red Cross, it'd be like this bureaucratic, nightmare. I mean, you spend so much time.
I'm sure.
But it is possible to convert. Yeah, but that's never going to happen here. And I'm grateful that, those organizations saw value in FreeCodeCamp, but that's not where we're going. Like we don't want to be, FreeCodeCamp by Acme Corporation or something like that, right?
Right.
I just would imagine the offers are plentiful, and the temptation is very.
I mean,
very large.
It's not really for me,
or could be. I mean, for some, depends.
Yeah, I'm just a simple dude. I like hanging out with my kids. I like reading books and going for runs. I mean, I don't know because I'm in this very fortunate position where I live in a really advanced country with rule of law, order. Like you get more money. It's almost like an insurance policy, right? Like if I get cancer, I'll be able to pay for all my chemotherapy and my radiotherapy, or any surgeries necessary, right? If my kids get cancer, I'll be able to pay for that. So money at some point just becomes a score, a number that in theory you can dip into if you really need to. I don't think that really applies to me. I'd much rather just be a normal person and have a normal kind of middle American life than be cruising around in a Ferrari in San Francisco or something.
Yeah.
Hard left. Go ahead.
Okay, hard left turn. So in closing, we're going to talk about this topic because you're not busy enough with FreeCodeCamp. You decide, you know what we want to do? We want to disrupt. We want to disrupt Meetup with an open source event planning platform for not just for developers, but for everybody to be able to just set up their own instance with a Docker container. Tell us about Chapter and why you're doing this and how it relates to the current, to the recent changes in Medium. I'm not sure if it's actually inspired by that. If you're already working on it and you're like, oh, this is opportunistic. Tell us the story of Chapter real quick.
Yeah. So Meetup was acquired by WeWork a couple years ago. WeWork, as we all know, was not worth as much as they said it was.
Pretty disastrous reverse IPO.
Yeah, it's one for the history books. But anyway, WeWork, of course, and as of October when I made this announcement, it was a few hours after Meetup had announced that they were enacting this new policy that they were going to charge everybody a $2 RSVP fee whenever they RSVP'd for an event. Now, FreeCodeCamp, grudgingly, has 40-ish meetups on Meetup. Most of our study groups are organized on Facebook because it's free, but some meetups will pay the $20 a month to have a meetup page, which I think is ridiculous that it costs that much money, but it does. And people are willing to pay for it. So we quickly did some back-of-the-envelope calculations, and based on the number of events we had, it would have cost us like $20,000 extra every year. Not just to us, but to the entire community in aggregate. If they were all paying,
and that $2 is essentially yours to potentially get as a donation. So it just
or it's just money in their pocket that they shouldn't have to spend to RSVP to a free event.
It's not for the organizer. It's for the people who.
It's for Meetup.
Right.
It's for the platform, the infrastructure that hasn't changed. The only notable thing that Meetup has done in the past 10 years was get acquired by WeWork. They have been
It's the
standing
exact same
still
website. Yeah.
in terms of product, in my humble opinion. And I say this as somebody who's been using Meetup for the last 10 years.
I could say that as well, because there's like, I recently, as part of this, was like, I thought I closed my account. I double checked on it. I didn't. I was like, I'm close it. Because I thought I did before. I think when they were acquired by WeWork, it was just like,
I never knew they got acquired. This was the first I had heard. I mean, I'd just been a grudging Meetup user as well. Just more from the...
They'd done some other stuff too. I can't recall what, but it was just like, you know what? If it wasn't like, oh, I'm canceling, Meetup from my life. It was more like, I don't use the platform anymore. I don't find value in it. And I'm like, wow, if you leave a profile somewhere, at least your data is still there. So there's still this opportunity for them to use you when you've since gone away. So my thought was like, I'm going to pull my account and not do that anymore.
Well, what I love about the open source community is like, we don't have to put up with that stuff if we don't want to. But that being said, somebody has to step up and like throw some code on the table or a spec on the table.
Yeah.
And, that's one of the things we talked with Siege Bot about what they're doing with the federated, replacement for the package management. What's it called? I can't remember the name of it. All of a sudden.
Entropic?
Yeah, Entropic.
Entropic, yeah.
And just the fact that it's like, well, we could all sit around and complain. And hey, as people who talk into microphones a lot, some of what we do is just
the easiest thing for us to do is to complain.
Yeah, we complain quite a bit. But in the open source world, it's like, hey, we can actually solve some of these problems. And that's why I was just impressed by the announcement and your guys' at least beginnings of an effort to say, you know what, Meetup has value. This is a thing that needs to exist, but it's not like it's irreplicable or replaceable. So
it's not that complicated. So yeah. We quickly made an announcement. Like, I thought about it really hard. I just decided, yes, this is important enough. This is going to make a big enough difference for just us that it's worth having self-hosted chapter management tool. I mean, that's what it is. It's for multi-chapter organizations. So we're not trying to boil the ocean and just say, we're all events everywhere, just like Meetup is, right? We're just focused on like, the YMCA or the Boys and Girls Club of America or Rotary Club, Lions Club, some of these other organizations that have lots of chapters. They can just have their own server. They can have full control of the data, and people can go there and set up events, and they can have chapter organizers, and then they can have some discovery within their own organization, and they can just have a little subdomain or subdirectory that's like, ymca.com/chapter or womenwhocode.org/chapter or something like that, right? So as far as how it's coming along, I tweeted out this kind of somewhat angry tweet by Quincy Larson, relatively emotionless tweet standards. And a lot of people were like, yeah, that's messed up. Like it was like I think it was a tweet of the screenshot of like the Meetup,
their announcement or
cheerful
whatever.
announcement.
Yeah.
Oh,
great news,
no
everyone.
worries, everybody.
You're right.
Yeah, this is actually going to slightly reduce your cost as an organizer and pass like massive costs on to the community. But anyway, a lot of people retweet it, and I had a little link to a Discord room, which Discord is not open source, of course, but it is pretty convenient for just organizing an impromptu thing. I've used it for hackathons and stuff. So everybody jumped in there, and we got like 1,000 people jump in. Most of them just, of course, promptly left and forgot about it, but some of them stayed, and we started brainstorming, like, what kind of tools are we going to use? What's the user story? What are they going to look like? Who are the roles? And we quickly got a lot of stuff ironed out, like got the schema, got like an API documentation up, got an API up. So now we're just building a lot of the additional functionality we need for our MVP. But soon it'll be out, and of course it won't be amazing right off the bat, but eventually it'll be great.
I love this.
Of course it won't be amazing.
There's a theme.
But eventually it'll be great.
That's right.
I like that.
Theme for the show, eventual greatness. So how do people get involved? I mean, typical GitHub flow, like hop on the find chapter in the show notes and like get involved, because this is a thing that we could use. And if you could use it and you want to have, seems like to me, pretty easy entry, low hanging like collaborator fruit. Like, hey, here's a pretty open project that's still getting itself figured out. That's the best time to get involved, because like huge impact. Like you can be a big contributor early on. Check out chapter from the freeCodeCamp crew.
Yeah.
Would you say it's a Meetup alternative though?
Well,
I have a question. If the answer is yeah, then I got a question.
I mean, it's for our purposes as an NGO that has lots of chapters around the world, absolutely. Like we're not going to use Meetup anymore.
So you're solving your own problem
Yeah.
first, and hopefully the problem you have is multiplied by many others.
Yeah, well, I'm
definitely
confident it is.
Yeah,
Well, sure it
definitely
is.
But even if only we used it internally, it'd still be
It's just fine.
$20,000 in savings, and
Right.
also the pride of us being able to go in and tweak things and not having all of
Yeah.
our user data just be like owned by WeWork in their desperate, cash squeezing efforts.
Yeah.
So what about more traditional meetups? So like we have the Nebraska JavaScript
Yeah.
meetup. It's just a very typical JavaScript meetup. It's chapter. It's not multi-chapter. It's just like, well, we do a meetup and you can
You could run like
RSVP.
you could run your own instance. It's just $20 for whatever, $5 to get like a tiny little server that'll run it.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to like make it as compact as possible. Like instead of using Elasticsearch, for example, we're just going to use Postgres queries. So little tweaks like that just reduce the number of services we have to have running in a Docker container.
Yeah.
Has the idea of federated ever
Yeah.
made it into and how did that go? What were the thoughts around that? Share.
I mean, not necessarily from a technological perspective, but just like a way that you can opt into being part of a shared discovery network.
right, exactly.
Right.
Because the main benefit of Meetup
Yeah, exactly.
is really discovery. Right.
That's the only
Yeah.
benefit.
I mean, if you have your own organization, you already have a mailing list of tons of people. People know your website and they're visiting it already. Then you don't need to worry as much about discovery, but it's still a nice thing to have.
Well, you still go there and check your interests too.
Yeah.
So if a new group comes up near you geographically, let's say my interests are JavaScript and Ruby. Well, anytime anything touches those two areas, then I'm going to get notified.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't want to just prop up your tent without an audience and no opportunity for discovery.
Yeah, you wouldn't.
That's what I was curious about federated.
I mean, this could eventually come to displace Meetup in a lot of respects, but that's not our goal at this point.
Yeah.
Even though initially I was like so angry at Meetup, I was like,
Yeah.
let's just create a Meetup killer. But that's not how I think. Like when I'm thinking clear-headedly and I don't see red. I think practically, what can we do for our organization? What can
Right.
we do for our community? And this is the right scope, right scale tool
Right.
that's going to work for them.
Well, it's been 5 years, 4 since we last talked, 5 since the inception. This is your 5th year anniversary. Similar question in the companion podcast you asked us, which was, hey, what's the next 5 years like for you? What's the future hold for you? Are you lack of visionary like I am currently, or are you visionary and you've got lots of ambition?
I have an incredible amount of things I'd like to do. A lot of it comes down to how much we have in our budget because we don't want to overextend ourselves. We're a tiny organization. We want to make sure everything we do properly and that we're not spreading ourselves too thin. So if we can continue to grow our budget, we'd like to do a lot more explanatory journalism and explain a lot more about technology and put tech news in context through really in-depth primers. We'd like to create a lot more really good first-party courses, and we'd like to create a lot more interactive curricula. We'd love to be able to figure out a way that we could pay for servers so that we could actually have Linux-focused challenges, Git-focused challenges, all these things that require like file
Right.
systems, essentially.
Right.
Like you can only do so much in the browser. Just, for example, we're able to do Python because Mozilla just released a giant library that's a significant update from like Brython or some of these other browser-based Python tools. But we'd really like to be able to actually have full development environments like on a server that is showing up on freeCodeCamp that you yourself have your own little mini, compartment on the server. It costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
So yeah, if we're able to increase the budget, we're going to just keep doing what we do with those 3 pillars. We're going to keep growing the number of people on the forum and by extension in IRL events. And we're also going to just keep creating articles and videos, and we're going to keep expanding the curriculum.
Gosh, we haven't even talked about that side of the publication, your YouTube channel. I mean, we're on there right now, right? Theoretically. So
subscribe. We do have a YouTube channel.
click
you
the
go.
bell for notifications. You get it every
Exactly.
time you
Don't
listen
forget
to
to
it.
like and subscribe.
Yeah.
Click the bell.
That's right. YouTubers, they always it's like subscribe and the bell.
Right.
Why did YouTube do that?
They want you to have to subscribe twice.
I've never hit the bell in my
Well,
life.
actually, it's kind of like a double opt-in. You subscribe because you're interested.
What's the bell give you? It like makes
notifications?
I don't care that much that you
No, I
published
don't
a
either.
video. Like I'll come watch it on my own terms. Thank
Yeah.
you very
Yeah.
much. No one's that important.
Well, that's where the double opt-in is.
I mean, I get it from the creator side. Like,
Yeah.
I would love to have the bell for my channel, but I don't want to have your bell for my feed.
Keep your bell, all right?
right.
Keep your bell.
Well, Quincy, man, it's
Yeah,
been an amazing
what a journey.
It's been fun watching you over these last 5 years. The numbers speak for themselves. I think the fact that you can educate at such a efficient rate makes it total sense for people who have the funds and have benefited from Free Code Camp, or know people who have. That $5 seems like it makes a lot of sense. So one more time to pitch to our listeners: if you appreciate the work they're doing and you want to help educate the next generation of coders out there, whether they're young or old, or what part of the world they're in, no better way than to do a recurring donation to Free Code Camp.
And when he says better, there's no more efficient way.
Right, and the leverage is amazing.
Yeah.
Yep.
And thanks for sitting down with us. We really appreciate you and all the work you're doing.
Thanks again for having me back. It's been a privilege talking to you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Quincy. Same here.